Good afternoon. I welcome you to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Russia. We have a weekly briefing, a press center, Russian and foreign correspondents with us. I will start with a collective answer to such a big collective question that everyone has asked and is being asked by all the mass media on this subject. Regarding the US-Ukrainian meeting in Jeddah on March 11th, the questions were different. What are the results? How do we evaluate them? How do we respond to the proposals that have been, someone says, voiced, someone says, formulated, and so on? So, regarding the results of the US-Ukrainian meeting in Jeddah on March 11th, including proposals for a truce and so on, we are closely following and have been following the meeting of representatives of the United States and Ukraine held in Jeddah on March 11th. We have read the statement adopted as a result of it, which contains various ideas. At the moment, no official appeals have been received to us in this regard. For our part, we will be ready to discuss the initiatives outlined there during future contacts with the American side. I can also say that such contacts are possible already today, and we will definitely inform you about their results, depending on the specifics that we will have. Now we turn to the situation around Ukraine. As you know, on March 16th, we will celebrate the 11th anniversary of a landmark historical event, the holding of the all-Crimean referendum on reunification with the Russian Federation. The 18th of March marks the 11th anniversary of the signing of the treaty on the admission of the Republic of Crimea and the city of Sevastopol to Russia. On this day, the residents of Crimea independently and consciously, and of course, most importantly, freely made a choice of the future for themselves, for their children. 96, as many as 77% of those who took part in the vote, voted for joining Russia in the Republic of Crimea. In Sevastopol, 96.5%. This was a fair and long-awaited decision for the Crimeans and for all citizens of our country. For 11 years, our enemies have made many attempts to literally punish both Crimeans and all Russian citizens for that free choice in favor of returning to their native harbor. Residents of Crimea have endured not only water, energy, food, and transport blockade. By the way, I would also add logistics, given that they were not given the opportunity to obtain the appropriate documents, to move around a number of countries. First of all, we are talking about NATO countries, not for participation in international conferences, where the issue of Crimeans, was discussed, not for other purposes, with humanitarian and so on. And it was done exactly according to this ethno-cultural, national, geographical, civic principle. They also endured the real legal aggression unleashed by the Kiev regime with the support of the same NATO countries. The Western propaganda campaign in the media and international structures failed miserably when Crimea was called. Remember, they just didn't come up with anything there. And the peninsula of fear, where people are allegedly discriminated against on some grounds. This is after the people who live in this region have finally received legally formalized rights and freedoms, including those related to their nationality. For the first time in recent decades, this was done by our country. It is well known that the authorities of Ukraine treated the peninsula and its inhabitants in the period from 1992 to 2014 year, but literally on a residual basis. During the Ukrainian period, the economy practically did not develop, the infrastructure was declining, the humanitarian sphere was subjected to total, someone will say Ukrainization, someone will just say complete discrimination, just with the aim of overthrowing all that history, culture, which is not just pride, but the essence, the life of the inhabitants of the peninsula. As for other questions, but it seems to me there is nothing even to tell. You will remember how the Crimean Peninsula returned to our country. After all those who came there after the referendum in the 15th year asked the question, how is it really a world pearl? From the point of view of tourism, the resort has not developed for so many years, and was simply forgotten by those who called Crimea their own then for many years. As for the Russian-speaking population, it was not just subjected to harassment, it was really real discrimination. And Russia in every sense, historically, culturally, has been consistently, literally wiped out, squeezed out not just from the peninsula, but from the memory and consciousness of people who have sincerely impressed themselves with the history of Russian culture for generations. And after the reunification of Crimea with the Russian Federation, the situation, of course, has changed. The transport and engineering infrastructure has been radically reconstructed. In the 2018 year, the Crimean Bridge was opened. This is a unique project. The brightest symbol, probably, is the reunification of Crimea with Russia. The new Simferopol-Ivazovsky Airport and the modern Tavrida Highway have been built. Balaklavskaya-Sevastopol, Tavrichesky-Simferopol District, Sakskaya, TP have been put into operation. Large-scale construction of gas pipelines is underway. Almost every month, a new locality is connected to the networks. It is gaining momentum, and of course housing construction. Social facilities, including sports facilities, are being built at an active pace. Agriculture has been revived. Winemaking is actively developing. The resort and tourism sector has seriously strengthened its position. This is what causes this monstrous anger, which is expressed in endless aggression on the part of the Kiev regime and all those who stand behind it. On the 31st of January of the 24th year, the main judicial organ of the United Nations is the International Court of Justice. Requests are not to be confused with the quasi-court, which calls itself the IC. This is the International Court of Justice of the United Nations. So, in his ruling, he rejected almost all of Ukraine's demands and recognized that Russia's policy complies with its obligations under the International Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination. This is the most important conclusion that the court was able to draw, among other things, thanks to the comprehensive information provided by the Russian side on measures taken at the state level to ensure national and cultural diversity in Crimea. So, in the 17th year, a school was opened in the area of compact residence of Crimean Tatars in Simferopol, which is ironically called the School of 4 Ukrainian Presidents. It could not be completed for more than 20 years when the authorities were as many as 4 presidents of Ukraine. To this day, restoration of architectural monuments and religious shrines abandoned by the Ukrainian authorities is actively underway in Crimea. The mass media are working successfully, by the way, in Ukrainian too, in the Crimean Tatar language. The information provided by Russia was, to the International Court of Justice of the United Nations, was extremely convincing and completely destroyed the ability to influence the decision of the International Court of Justice. With fakes, false information that was promoted, including with Western media, and it is safe to say that these attempts by Russia's detractors to challenge the status of Crimea only convinced the inhabitants of the peninsula more strongly of the correctness of their historic fateful free decision. Well, and directly to the situation around the Ukrainian crisis. Ukrainian militants do not stop terrorizing the civilian population and the civilian infrastructure of our country. On the night of the 11th of March, the IFU subjected several Russian regions, including the Moscow region, to a massive drone attack. According to the Ministry of Defense of our country, 343 drones were shot down by air defense on duty. The largest number of 126 drones were destroyed in the sky over the territory of the Kursk region. Of these, 6 drones were intercepted near the Kursk nuclear power plant. 91 drones were involved in the raid on Moscow and the Moscow region by Bandera. The remaining drones were eliminated over the territory of the Bryansk, Belgorod, Ryazan, Kaluga, Lipetsk, Oriel, Voronezh, and Nizhny Novgorod regions. What was chosen as a target for strikes? Residential buildings, social institutions, transport, and civil infrastructure facilities. Only terrorists can act like that. Unfortunately, it was not without a victim of the victims. As a result of the fall of drone debris in the parking lot of Miratorg in Domodedovo, 3 employees were killed. In total, more than 20 people received injuries of varying severity, according to the information of the Commissioner for Children's Rights under the President of our country, Maria Lvova-Belova. 3 children were injured in the Moscow region, 2 of whom are under 3 years old. A detailed statement of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs on this blatant barbaric crime of the Bandera terrorist regime has been posted on our website. In the DPIE, as a result of shelling and detonation of explosive objects in Gorlovka, from March 6 to the present, at least 17 civilians, including emergency workers, have been injured. On the 9th of March, in the Kherson region, the IFU struck the shopping malls in the village of Veliki Kapani with 2 HIMARS missiles, with a cluster warhead. This was done precisely for the maximum striking effect. It is noteworthy that in the conditions of the termination, as it turned out, of the temporary provision of intelligence by the United States to the Kiev regime for the operation of long-range missile systems, satellite tracking of the target was carried out from French telecommunications satellites with light organization. The European Telecommunications Satellite Organization and guidance was regulated by the French reconnaissance satellite CSU-3. At the time of the barbaric attack, dozens of civilians were in the shops. By the way, perhaps Paris does not know about it. Here the gunners worked on them. 4 people were killed, including a 15-year-old teenager. At least 7 people were injured, among them those who arrived at the scene to rescue people. They came under repeated shelling. They were both paramedics and an ambulance driver. Buildings and cars were damaged. The medic's car was destroyed. On the night of the 10th of March, in the village of Velikaya Repetica, the enemy raided another ambulance with the help of a drone. Who can act like that? Yes, this is how terrorists can act. Cars and medical equipment were destroyed. Miraculously, the doctors remained alive. On the evening of the 10th of March, the IFU struck the Dobrynya shopping center in the Balaya settlement of the Belovsky district of the Kursk region. 5 people were killed, and 8 of 4 teenagers of 13 and 14 were injured. On the 1st of March, the IFU terrorists attacked a compound feed production plant in the village of Kazarevka. 4 employees of the company were killed, 2 were injured. In the Belgorod region, on the 8th and 10th of March, as a result of attacks by Bandera drones on civilian, again emphasizing civilian cars and residential facilities, 1 person was killed and 6 were injured. On the 9th of March in Shebekino, a civilian was injured as a result of an explosion on a Mini. On the 11th of March, a man died from dropping an explosive device from a drone. As a result of drone attacks on cars and residential buildings in other settlements of the region, 6 more people were injured. No sane person who has the information, who understands what is being discussed technically, has a question that all this was done specifically in the form of attacks on civilians. In the Zaporozhye region, on the 7th of March, an enemy drone attacked a kindergarten Kamenka-Dniprovskaya, a town. Fortunately, with God's help, there were no casualties. There were no children at the time of the impact. In the liberated village of Cherkasskaya Porekhnaya, Kursk region, Russian soldiers found the bodies of civilians killed by the IFU militants. Most of those killed are pensioners. They weren't just killed, They were brutally murdered. I can't say, I honestly say, I don't know which is better, which is worse. But that, and the picture that our fighters saw, plunged them into shock. Just think about it. Pensioners, civilians were subjected to brutal reprisals. There is not a single question to all these global, so-called human rights, to all these non-governmental organizations, to all structures that claim to be so concerned about the fate of the civilian population. They think about children. They don't know how to help them all over the world. They carry posters, publish materials on social networks, come up with hashtags. Don't you notice all this? Or do you notice, but just turn away? So there's nowhere to turn away. And we perfectly understand why the Kiev regime has gone berserk like this these days, suffering huge losses on the battlefield every day. But the Nazi Kiev regime is trying to show, with the help of terrorist methods, as some kind of its ability to negotiate, as they formulate it, from a position of alleged strength. In fact, everything happens with precision, but on the contrary, they demonstrate their weakness, their helplessness. This is, in fact, its end. But for all this, for all these endless torments of people, for all these crimes, punishment follows. Russian courts continue to sentence Ukrainian neo-Nazis and, of course, mercenaries for their war crimes. That's how a British citizen, James Anderson, who has committed a crime against civilians of the Kursk region since mid-November of the 24th year, was sentenced to 19 years in prison. The militants of the 64th Separate Rifle Battalion of the 44th Separate Mechanized Brigade of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Ivan Frolet, Yuri Zadorozhny, Yuri Sikenko, and Yuri Hayek, detained on September 10, 24th by Russian servicemen, were found guilty of committing a terrorist attack in the Kursk region. They were sentenced to 17 years in prison. It is established that the terrorists prevented the evacuation of the civilian population and repeatedly opened fire to kill, again at civilians. Benjamin Stewart, a US mercenary who fought on the side of Ukrainian militants, was sentenced in absentia to 14 years in prison, and Ivan Glishevsky, the commander of the 24th Separate Mechanized Brigade of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, was sentenced to 21 years. According to his criminal order, in January of the 24th year, an attack was carried out with the help of a drone on an official car in Gorlovka. It led to the death of 2 DPIE investigators. A militant of the 24th Separate Assault Battalion Idar, detained in August of the 24th year in the DPIE, received 12 years in custody. A terrorist organization, as you know, is banned in Russia. Oleg Doga, he shelled the settlements of the LPR in June-August of the 23rd year. The law enforcement agencies of our country will continue to work to bring to justice Ukrainian Nazis and foreign mercenaries for war and other crimes. And we will inform the world community about this, against the background of Washington's desire, as we see, to shift the time of military spending to Europe for the needs of the armed forces. The head of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, sent out, what do you think, to the leaders of the European Union countries on the 4th of March. It would seem that this is the same European Union that constantly cares about human rights, freedom, and democracies. What was the open letter about? It was an open letter outlining her proposed plan for the rearmament of Europe. Well, I mean the western part of it. This document provides, in particular, for the creation of new financial instruments that will allow countries, according to Ursula von der Leyen, the EU to allocate loans guaranteed by the EU budget in the amount of up to 150 billion euros in the interests of arms purchases, temporarily suspend the requirements of the Stability and Growth Pact, on the maximum permissible indicators of public debt and budget deficit, in favor of again increasing military spending, as well as redirect EU funds and structural funds intended to overcome differences in the level of economic development of territories for the needs of militarization, as well as expand the participation of the European Investment Bank in financing the defense needs of the European Union. What is it about? You see, and it cannot be considered otherwise. According to Ursula von der Leyen, this so-called plan will allow for an additional mobilization for defense purposes of a total of about 800 billion euros. Well, let's say close to a billion, to a trillion. Near the amount close to a trillion euros. This is also the incitement of war on the European continent. And, in a distorted interpretation, a supporter of this process, a supporter of inciting a big war, the implementation of the so-called plan will contribute to the entry of Europe, as she formulated it, a direct quote, into a new era of security and prosperity. And it will allow us to support, again, a direct quote, a free and sovereign Ukraine. You know, one could assume that they live in some other world, on another planet, that they don't look out of the window, that they only watch those channels that they themselves fill with misinformation. There is only one but. The militarization of those countries that are obviously losing, among other things, the ability for the normal functioning of their economies, is actively, simply at an exaggerated pace. Historically, this has always been called provoking war. In addition to the reported conclusions, no details about, for example, the sources of such large-scale financing of the militarization of Europe are given in these documents, and in the explanations to them. However, expert circles rightly point out that the European Union cannot do without tightening the belts of the social sector. There is simply nowhere to take these same funds in such quantities, because, as I said, we are already talking about an amount approaching close to 1 trillion euros. How far will the Europeans go and lead the absolutely illusory goal, as they formulate it, of protection from the Russian threat? It is illusory because it's all a made-up story, a deliberately made-up story based on Russophobia, on anti-Russian hysteria. And it is being promoted by Brussels officials who are inadequate and have lost their sense of reality. But that's where it's all going to lead. I think we'll see soon enough. And it is noteworthy that not everyone shares the militaristic fabrications, but the obscuration of Ursula von der Leyen. Literally, on the eve of the publication of this very mentioned initiative, a number of European Union countries blocked the new package of military assistance to Ukraine, proposed by the head of the European diplomacy Callas, in the amount of up to 20 billion euros, at the expense of the so-called frozen Russian assets. In fact, before our eyes, the European Union is finally turning from an economic association into a militarized structure, becoming a de facto branch of NATO, which is also engaged in outright theft. Where are these, so to speak, economic growth plans that the European Union should be engaged in? Where are the forecasts of economic development for the future, which should be handled by the EU's Brussels and all these Brussels officials? Where is the plan for the exit of the EU countries and states from the economic, industrial, by the way, scientific and technical crisis? None of this. There are only colossal funds for militarization, which it is still unclear where they will take. Now let's return to the situation in Ukraine. Information about the scale of desertion in the armed forces of Ukraine appears in open sources. According to the Ministry of Internal Affairs of Ukraine, in the 24th year, compared with the first year of a special military operation, the number of cases of unauthorized abandonment of a unit increased. How much do you think? 7 times. And desertion 11 times. In numbers, it looks like this. In the 22nd year, 3,214 people deserted from the AFU. They arbitrarily left a military unit in Ukraine, 6,183 people. Once again, this is the 22nd year. Now let's look at the 24th. This figure was 23,209 people. And now, I will repeat once again about desertion in Ukraine, 66,240 people, respectively. And now attention. This is the official statistics of Ukraine. In reality, according to experts, there are more than 150,000 people on the run in Ukraine today, and this dynamic has a steady upward trend. In January-February, 35,738 people deserted in Ukraine. I repeat once again, only for the period from January to February of this 25th year, more than 35,000 people deserted in Ukraine. Why? Yes, obviously. They understand that they have been deceived. The Kiev regime deceived, Zelensky deceived, all these liberal so-called Western democracies, in fact dictatorial regimes, deceived, that they were used, that they are now simply being killed by those who told them about the great future under Zelensky. And against this background, the so-called voluntary recruitment company is gaining momentum. Who is it about? Who voluntarily, of course, we take this word in quotation marks, are going to recruit citizens of Ukraine aged from 18 to 24 years. The first of them signed contracts, have already taken the oath. They will serve the 10th Mountain Assault Brigade. Do you understand what it is? What is a Mountain Assault Brigade? These are not the guys who will control, for example, I do not know, drones or sit at computers, at the keyboard or, I do not know, be at dressing stations or take into account data on the losses of the veto. No. It's a death trap. Replacement of the dead in the senseless meat assaults of Zelensky. According to the deputy of the Verkhovna Rada Maxim Savrasev, a bill is currently being developed on the military registration in Ukraine of minors from the age of 14. His readiness of this bill is estimated at 70%. Well, here it is. Hitlerjugend according to Zelensky. According to the document, military enlistment offices will be able, as it is said, to cooperate with classroom teachers in Ukraine. Yes. When will they wake up? Then everything is there. They will provide classroom teachers of Ukrainian schools with data on physically prepared students for special accounting. What do you want? After all, they were lured into this bloody trap by those Western regimes that did not spare their own children, let alone minors, but simply newborns. They invented sex reassignment surgeries for them, called it, and conducted the middle gender. Why should they feel sorry for the citizens of Ukraine and children after that, after they have become humanized themselves? Those who are inferior in physical fitness, they will be trained. I mean children in Ukraine. This is being developed now. They will train for driver mechanics there. You think it's fate for girls. Girls too, you know, somehow. Girls. We are already talking about minors. It is planned to attract girls in Ukraine to analytical centers, as well as doctors and cooks. The topic of forced mobilization of women is being actively discussed in Ukrainian social networks. Where are all the non-governmental organizations Where are all these representatives of all international structures for women's rights? I'm not interested in what's going on in Ukraine. The facts of receiving summonses in Ukraine, even by pregnant, disabled, and women of retirement age, are given, taking into account the bacchanalia created by the Kiev regime to exterminate its citizens. I would not be surprised if all this is then systematized and presented with an invoice. And of course, there is a struggle with religion in Ukraine, with faith, and the raider seizures by supporters of the so-called Orthodox Church of Ukraine, of temples and property of the canonical Ukrainian Orthodox Church, are being stopped. All this is accompanied, of course, by violence. Violence against living people, against priests, and, of course, the flock. At the beginning of the 25th year, according to the media, illegal meetings were held only in Bucha to transfer 16 parishes of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church of the Chernivtsi region under the control of self-consecrators. A change of jurisdiction was hastily executed, and 13 so-called charters of religious communities of the Orthodox Church of Ukraine were registered. It's okay, right? How's it going? I remember that the State Department has been writing reports and publishing about freedom of religion and faiths all these years. There was some kind of scale of academic performance in different countries. As the head of the Department of Culture of the local regional administration, I mean now the Chernivtsi region, Elena Bidnar publicly stated, "The authorities do not verify the legitimacy of the actions of supporters of the Orthodox Church of Ukraine, and no one checks whether such community meetings took place and what decisions were made at them." An egregious case occurred on the 6th of March, when adherents of the so-called Orthodox Church of Ukraine cynically took advantage of the emergency hospitalization of the 62-year-old archpriest of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church of the invading district of the Chernivtsi region, Vasily Kovalchuk. He was admitted to the intensive care unit in a pre-infarction state after an opera performed on him the day before. Events and searches of the SBU, with the assistance of the police, were actually seized, previously re-registered in favor of the schismatics of the Holy Door Mission Church of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church in the village of Komarevtsi. That's how it all happens. What kind of a split is this? Excuse me, split. It implies internal processes of disagreement, inconsistencies of some things, not finding common ground. And this is the destruction of orthodoxy in Ukraine. The Ministry of Culture of Ukraine, on the 5th of March by order, initiated the creation of the Verification Commission. And just think about it, it will have to work until the 30th of May this year. What will this commission check under the auspices of the Ministry of Culture of Ukraine? You can't believe it. It defies any analysis, comprehension. This is only for Bulgakovs pen such facts. So the Ministry of Culture of Ukraine has established a commission to check the relics of saints located in the tombs of the near and far caves of the Kiev-Pechersk Lavra. You may ask why. There is also an official response from the Ministry of Culture of Ukraine. I quote, "To determine the historical and scientific value, relics of saints. I think it will even be stronger than Bulgakov." The result of this work, of course, was decided to be classified in advance. Here is such an inventory of relics. The evidence is actually of moral degradation, mired in total godlessness and disrespect for the feelings of the believers of the junta. That's right, absolutely right, Sergei Lavrov said aptly at a press conference following talks with the OSCE Secretary General, who said that apparently they are in the West, all those who are behind this monstrous behavior, deeds, crimes of the Kiev regime. They don't believe in anything anymore except Satan. It is not by chance that, following such blasphemy, On the 8th of March, the Kiev-Pechersk Lavra, taken away by the authorities of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church of All Saints, was removed from the dome, but the cross literally almost fell off. You've seen it all, and many Ukrainians saw the incident as a bad omen. Treat it on social networks as a reminder of the betrayal of the Zelensky regime of canonical orthodoxy and all the crimes of the armed forces of Ukraine. We put this to those who are engaged in theology, I know metaphysics. Let them decide how to interpret it. But there are facts that require a political, moral, and historical assessment. As a matter of fact, this is what we are talking about today. Believers there also recalled that a month and a half before the start of a special military operation, the cross of St. Sophia Cathedral in Kiev fell, and the Ministry of Culture of Ukraine, appointed by the Orthodox so-called Church of Ukraine, the pseudo-vicar of the holy monastery Avram Lotash, fearing public outcry, hastened to write off what happened. As they said back then, remember, right, vibrations from Russian shelling. At the same time, however, officials hedged in Ukraine reminded that the temple allegedly requires a comprehensive restoration for a long time. You know, in the 23rd and 24th years, the schismatics held so-called memorial services for Ivan Mazepa, whom the Russian Orthodox Church sold to anathema for high treason in 1908. The listed facts all testify to and once again confirm the relevance of the special military operation and the demilitarization of Ukraine, the elimination of threats emanating from its territory. All these goals, as stated by the Russian leadership, will be fulfilled. You know, I can say that it's not just the well-worn diplomats, statesmen, and politicians. Shake the words spoken. As it is called there, the High Representative of the European Union for Foreign Policy, Kallas, said that the Kiev regime allegedly does not strike at the peaceful civilian population on the territory of the Russian Federation. This shocked public figures, ordinary people, people who, in general, are not involved in such an active one in any way. In active opposition to the Kiev regime, the Ukrainian armed forces and so on, who are busy with their own affairs, work, empathize, of course, but not so much on the agenda. Even they wrote letters to us, called and said that either this is a monstrous, terrible lie, which a person in such a position, especially a woman who understands what suffering, pain is, what is the loss of children by parents, what is a blow to socially unprotected segments of the population, or it's just dehumanization. Or maybe it's the same thing. And people asked, how so? Why do the officials of the European Union dare to say this? Don't they know? No, they know. They have been receiving these materials for all these years, and not only since 2000 at the sites of international organizations. Although they blocked communication with us indirectly, since these materials were presented by our diplomats during the meeting, were voiced, published, and so on. But even before the 22nd year, they directly received these materials directly during negotiations with Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, who devoted most of his talks with each of the EU or Brussels officials to the problems of what was happening in the Donbas, and transmitted materials regarding what was happening there with the peaceful civilian population. They can't help but know. They pretend they don't know. And we will remind them of all this every time. I will now present data on children who suffered and died from the criminal actions of the Kiev regime from the 2014 year to the present. These data are presented by our ambassador at large on crimes of the Kiev regime, Mr. Miroshnik. He collected them in close contact with our law enforcement agencies, authorized by the relevant and, of course, the regions, regional authorities, but also, of course, with public organizations and just with citizens. This data is not final. And I'm not going to say that they are exceptionally accurate. Why? Because this is how, for example, these days, when Sudza was liberated, and when our military, RR, went into courtyards, into basements and saw. Including how they talked and showed children's skulls. This data will be updated and updated. But basically, I will say that everyone should have an idea about the crimes that the Kiev regime committed against children with Western money. So that there is an idea of the order of the numbers. For 10 years, the blood of at least 1,700 children has been on the hands of the Ukrainian inhuman militants. I emphasize once again, these are only approximate preliminary figures. After yesterday's video, which was published by the Russian media with videos, with direct quotes from our soldiers who liberated Syria and held a skull in their hands, which is most likely a child's skull, you understand how many similar finds, tragic and terrible, we still have to face. Let me remind you, according to the Joint Centers for Control and Coordination of the Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republics, from 2000 of the 14th year until the beginning of a special military operation, as a result of the aggression of the Kiev regime, at least 129 children were killed in the republics of Donbass. More than 500,000 minors suffered then. I say again, this is up to 2022 year, but since the end of February of the 22nd year, at least 830 minors have been injured on the territory of the frontline regions of the Russian Federation. As a result of the criminal actions of the Bandera junta, at least 218 children were killed. This is only exactly confirmed data. In the 24th year, 347 children became victims at the hands of the Nazis. 296 minors were injured, 51 children died. 24th year only. The youngest girl killed by the Nazis was only 4 months old. Over the past year, children have been victims of artillery and rocket attacks on civilian infrastructure. They were blown up by mines, cluster munitions. There have been proven cases when the cause of the tragedy was the primary dangerous objects disguised as toys. How many times have we talked about this? The punishers scattered them in places of mass attendance, including by children. The number of young Russians affected during the year by OSCE drone strikes has reached 55. 44 minors were injured, 11 were killed. Drone operators attacked civilian cars, public transport, residential buildings, playgrounds, markets, cafes, only in December of the 24th year in their own homes, physically in front of their parents as a result of deliberate drone strikes, which were inflicted on small private housing buildings. 2 boys of 9 and 12 years old were killed on the 1st of December of the 24th year in Starodub, Bryansk region, on the 14th of December in the village of Veselaya, Belgorod region. Another similar tragedy was literally miraculously avoided at the end of December of the 24th year in the village of Razumnaya, Belgorod region. An 8-year-old child remained alive, but received injuries to the thoracic spine of moderate severity. Over the past year, the largest number of victims of the criminal actions of the armed forces of Ukraine, I mean minors, was recorded in the DPIA. 127 children were injured there, 11 were killed. 88 children were injured and 12 were killed in the Belgorod region. 24 children were injured and 4 were killed in the Kursk region. In addition, according to the Ministry of Education of the Russian Federation, due to the barbaric shelling by militants of the Kiev regime of the territory of the DPI and LPR, Kherson, Zaporozhye, Belgorod, Bryansk, Kursk regions in the 24th year, at least 20,242 children were deprived of the opportunity to attend kindergartens. 173,762 students of general educational institutions and 12,439 students of professional educational organizations were transferred to a distance learning format using distance learning technologies. In these regions, at least 396 kindergartens were damaged during the year. 9 of them were destroyed. 503 schools were damaged, 35 were destroyed. 104 professional educational organizations were affected. 5 of them were destroyed. These are the statistics that will become a tombstone for the Kiev regime. Now think about it, all those who regularly vote in the countries of the European Union, in NATO countries, for assistance to the Kiev regime. What are you voting for? Against whom are the muzzles of your weapons directed? And what are these tens in the hundreds going to? And now we are already seeing large sums of millions of dollars and euros. And of course, now a whole lot of voices have arisen in the NATO space regarding the prospects of deploying so-called troops from Europe, as they formulate it, in Ukraine. You see in the statements of Western officials, in media reports, in leaks, endless reports about certain plans of Paris or London to send a certain, as they put it, European peacekeeping contingent to the territory of Ukraine. We have heard that even Copenhagen has recently shown willingness to join this initiative. It would seem that Donnie here right now Greenland can move away in every sense of the word. But no, and they do not need to defend their own borders, but it is unclear what. The idea is certainly not new, but remember, a year ago, French President Macron announced his intention to send the French military, of course, to die on the territory of Ukraine. You have repeatedly stressed at various levels that such so-called initiatives will only lead to an escalation of the situation. Assessments of the idea of a certain European peacekeeping contingent were given by Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov at a meeting with the OSCE Secretary General in Moscow on March 11th. And, of course, a whole block of this issue was devoted during an interview with the Russian Foreign Minister, which was published yesterday, on Wednesday. You can get acquainted with it, with this interview on the website of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and on social networks, in official accounts of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in social networks. We even consider the voicing of such plans to be a frankly provocative step, which is aimed not at resolving the conflict, but at maintaining unhealthy and harmful illusions at the top of the Kiev regime. It is significant that Washington is distancing itself from the plans of London, Paris, at least in words, to deploy any of its contingent in Ukraine. I think in part because they assume what it can lead to from a military point of view. We know perfectly well that Western military personnel, albeit in a limited number, even under cover, but they have been present in Ukraine since at least 2015 year, under the guise of instructors, under the guise of advisors, under the guise of some volunteers, often in violation of national criminal legislation, in terms of the provisions of articles prohibiting mercenary activity, in different ways, but they are there. Citizens of NATO member states support and maintain equipment coming to the armed forces from the West, provide advisory assistance in conducting and planning Bandera operations, and terrorist attacks against our country and its citizens. We talked about all this regularly, about British participation in terrorist activities together with the Kiev regime, about those who committed crimes, being literally gunners and at the same time representing NATO countries. Unfortunately, we note that some political forces in Europe continue to put sticks in the wheels of the process that is still being planned, which in the future could lead to a settlement. But even now, even one word peace, even one word settlement causes them to grind, because their main task is, of course, escalation and carnage. Residents of Ukraine can know for sure who, so to speak, to thank for the ongoing conflict of Zelensky and, of course, the leaders of this entire NATO old world who support him, who advocate the continuation of arms supplies, sponsor terrorist activities, and are now also thinking about some pseudo-peacekeepers. You understand, there is also, in addition to, so to speak, legal assessment, political analysis, there is also just common sense. Think about it. The word peacemaker, the key part, is connected with the world. And look at what those who want to send some contingents to Ukraine in some NATO capitals are talking about. There are no statements about peace. There are no arguments about establishing a peaceful life there, and there have not been all these years. There's something else on your mind. What? That's how we talked about it at the beginning of the briefing. Militarization by 1 trillion euros. It is absolutely unacceptable for us to deploy a unit of the armed forces of other states in Ukraine under any flag, be it foreign contingents, military bases, some kind of peacekeeping operations, which are proposed by those who have removed the word peacekeeping and peace from their vocabulary in general. These are all rehashes. It's all obvious, familiar, painfully understandable. Because all this will mean involving these countries in a direct armed conflict with our country, to which we will respond with all available means. And, of course, so to speak, the Elysee Palace will literally, so to speak, sparkle. Once again, we are forced to note and declare that our former partners do not abandon attempts to misappropriate, and if we call a spade, then simply steal Russian assets that are frozen on the territory of the European Union as part of illegal restrictive measures. The Russian position on this issue remains unchanged. All blocked Russian funds and the income due on them are the property of the Russian Federation. The appropriation of profits from financial transactions carried out using our reserve funds without the appropriate consent of the Russian side is, once again, theft. No matter what pseudo-legal constructions, it is not covered up. The arguments that periodically appear in the European media that the operations, as they say, for the extraction and withdrawal of excess profits were not provided for by the current agreements, and therefore are allegedly legal, all this does not stand up to any criticism. Such unilateral actions constitute the appropriation of the sovereign property of a foreign state for the purpose of profit. They create a blatant international precedent and irreversibly discredit the financial system of the European Union in the eyes of the world community and, of course, global investors. Such actions, in particular by the French, clearly indicate that they are not interested in a long-term settlement of the crisis around Ukraine, and it also shows that they intend to continue pumping the Kiev regime with weapons, creating conditions for the continuation of the conflict. And about a global hoax, a bloody staging, a provocation with consequences. Teach me, after all, another bloody anniversary of this very staging is approaching. We have touched on this topic many times at all levels. The leadership of our country has said this, and the foreign minister regularly discusses this topic with foreign partners, including with representatives of international organizations. I don't think there was a briefing where we didn't talk about it. On April 3rd, It will be 3 years since the ordered and pre-staged, provoked production that the Zelensky regime and its Western patrons staged in the village of Bucha in the Kiev region. Then, in a hurry, as you remember, stories were concocted about the alleged mass murder of local residents, as they phrased it, by Russian servicemen, right? Despite the obviously staged nature of this provocation, all Western media and politicians rushed to spread information about it. It became an excuse, an explanation for whom, how. The fact that there is no need to negotiate, and there is no need to look for any peaceful way out of the current situation. No political processes are needed, and then all the NATO members, the EU members, all this collective Brussels buzzed that only on the battlefield everything should be decided. Russia has repeatedly provided a detailed refutation of this fake, while Ukraine, its Western curators are not even trying to provide any evidence of their own accusations, which they put forward against Moscow. It is absolutely unacceptable that international organizations, including the UN, condone the Kiev regime in this. Let me just remind you that, in accordance with its own charter, it is obliged to adhere to a neutral equidistant line in order to conduct a proper investigation. The Russian investigative authorities need additional information on the tragic events in Bucha, being well aware that the Kiev regime will not expose itself and will not shed light on its own bloody provocation. We have repeatedly appealed to the United Nations secretariats since 2000. It seems to me that Sergei Viktorovich Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, has raised this issue with the UN Secretary General at least 3 times. We also appealed to the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights with a request to assist in obtaining relevant data. In particular, in September of the 24th year, a request prepared by the Investigative Committee of Russia in cooperation with the Prosecutor General's Office of our country to investigate the circumstances of the provocation in Bucha was handed over to the Leonovites through the mediation of Russia in New York. They emphasized that additional information is necessary solely for the establishment of the truth, for the implementation of justice, for ensuring comprehensive protection of the rights of victims of the tragedy. In January of this year, we again called on the UN Secretariat to speed up the response to this very appeal. What do you think? In spite of everything, we have not received this from the Secretary in all these 3 years. He did nothing but, indeed it was, averting his eyes, shivering and such words, well, you understand everything, which, apparently, should indicate that they, in particular Vaughan, also understand everything. They just can't say.
Должны свидетельствовать о том, что они, в частности, ВОН, тоже все понимают.
A similar situation has developed with our demands to the UN Secretariat to get the Ukrainian country to provide a list of victims of the provocation. On September 22nd of the 22nd year, during a meeting of the UN Security Council on Ukraine, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of our country, Sergei Lavrov, publicly addressed the relevant appeal to the UN Secretary General. Subsequently, the minister repeatedly reminded Tony Gutters of his request during almost every personal meeting, during telephone conversations, and these efforts had no effect. At a briefing on October 25th of the 23rd year, a representative of the UN Secretary General's agency, Deus Harek, said that he had no information about why the Kiev regime had not yet handed over to Moscow the mentioned list of victims, and had no information about whether it planned to send it, as well as what obstacles prevented the Ukrainian country from doing so. At the beginning of February this year, Antonio Guterres, the UN Secretary General, during a meeting with representatives of the Russian mediation in New York, once again actually evaded assistance, adding that he did not have a list of victims of the tragedy in Bucha. Yes, it is clear that no one has this list, because it was all staged. This suggests that the organizers of this cynical, terrible, bloody provocation have nothing to show but empty words accusations. But hundreds of world mass media participated in the same production, in this provocation. I don't know if they were aware of it or if they were being cynically used, but I think even if they didn't realize it at the time, because no one prevented them from conducting an investigation during these 3 years, but they didn't investigate either. We once again demand that the Unsecretariat stop covering up Ukrainian dramatizations, and specifically this Ukrainian dramatization in Bucha, which was aimed at discrediting our country. We urge the United Nations Secretariat to facilitate a thorough investigation of the tragedy in Bucha, to identify the persons responsible for this monstrous crime of the Kiev regime. And so instead of investigating whether it's the situation in Bucha, the bloody provocation of the Kiev regime, whether it's the undermining of the northern streams, the civil infrastructure through which gas was flowing from Russia to the countries of the European Union, the countries of the same European Union are engaged in quasi-investigations in order to create a sense of their work and, of course, to keep Russophobia afloat. In Belgium, there has once again been an aggravation of the spy mania, the Belgian building of De Morgan and Hume. This is about the U-Internet portal, and her reviewer was also involved there, as well as the newspaper French Limit, Radio Liberty of Free Europe. It is clear what kind of radio stations they are. There is also, so to speak, no place to put the stigma. Suddenly and symptomatically, the authors of this next stuffing also synchronously connected to the pseudo-investigation. Naturally, these authors are well known to us. It is not the first year that they have been trying to make some kind of reputation for themselves, a name on the false sensations, allegedly existing in their, so to speak, U-bowels or NATO corridors of Russian spies there. Here is another action that has just been carried out. When such materials appeared literally under a carbon copy, the history of a person is described, his professional activity is studied, activity in social networks is studied, and then a label is glued directly with such a mark as a Russian spy with a postscript to believe what has been said. In addition to neglecting the elementary rules of journalistic ethics, it literally comes to an irresponsible and primitive adjustment of facts. It's not really bad to mount with each other, but who can it stop? We know that. We already have information, directly published by Washington, about how, in particular, the U.S. usually paid for such information companies. They go through these publications and search for our diplomats in their personal stories, though unsuccessfully. But again, what difference does it make for them? Signs of the presence of some kind of defamatory connections, or what could be passed off as some kind of espionage activity, more serious accusations of existence, even arson and even murder, terrorist acts, cyber attacks are added. All this is attributed to allegedly unnamed persons connected with Russia. Of course, all this happens without arguments, without evidence, without references. Why? Why is all this necessary? That's it. You can print and turn the page, forget, and after a while, come up with a new story. You know, it's just some kind of, frankly, this time hallucinogenic nonsense. And commenting on it is not just difficult, but even useless. These materials have nothing to do with either common sense or the notorious freedom of speech. We will definitely publish a selection of these materials with our favorite red seal with the word fake in the corresponding section of the website of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Russia. All of this is based not just on unreliable, unverified information. These are false fabrications, which were prepared as such. These are disinformation companies. That's what this next coordinated stuffing is for. Here, this is where I think we need to look for an answer, and it is also available. Despite everything, Brussels intends to continue the line of further escalation of relations with Russia. Again, we recall today's materials about Ursula von der Leyen and almost 1 trillion euros that need to be taken away from residents of the European Union countries for militarization and, of course, as it is formulated there, against our country. Well, there is, I forgot to add democracy in Ukraine. How can it be without her? It is for this purpose that a large-scale indoctrination of the Western European population has been deployed. He is being intimidated and continues to be intimidated by the mythical Russian threat, the threat from the East, and all just for the sake of one thing, to get into the pocket of hard workers in the European Union and pull out the next capex, for the sake of realizing very dubious aspirations that are imposed by the current political elite of the European Union, regardless of common sense. But this is done by the same Ursula von der Leyen who first robbed the residents of the European Union countries for, again, some hundreds of millions of dollars and euros for the purchase of vaccines of non-EU origin. According to completely opaque procedures, they simply agreed to buy vaccines, therefore tens, hundreds of millions of dollars, euros. And then what was done to them? And then they were destroyed, so it was impossible to calculate how many were used, which was not. But most importantly, it was impossible even to establish the quality of these vaccines. They took everything and destroyed it. But it's not enough. The next project is right there. It is possible to pump out money to Ursula von der Leyen, now even in large quantities, because weapons are more expensive than vaccines. Now the rates have risen to trillions of euros. That's what such publications are for. Every day it becomes more and more obvious the perniciousness of this very anti-Russian course. For the countries of the European Union themselves, inevitably, this course leads to a deterioration of the socio-economic situation in the countries of Western Europe, as well as the degradation of security throughout the continent. But, so to speak, Ursula von der Leyen raged. And here is the statement of the NATO Secretary General on Bosnia and Herzegovina. Listen, we paid attention too. It was impossible not to pay, including the questions there were. He made those statements on March 11th, during the recent visit of Duke Vin to Bosnia, against the backdrop of the political crisis in that country that is gaining momentum. Sota called on the Presidium of BE, direct quote, to solve the problem. What is he implying? What kind of problem should the Herzegovins solve in Bosnia? Yes, in general, it seems to me, and does not hide that it is necessary to deal with the situation with the leadership of the Republika Srpska. The fact that this problem arose intentionally, literally under far-fetched pretexts, and not without instructions from Western curators in Sarajevo, but simply, I would say, under their dictation, Ryu naturally did not want to mention. And why? Moreover, with his statements, he literally poured oil into the internal Bosnian crisis, calling so peremptorily for accelerating the Euro-Atlantic integration of Bosnia-Herzegovina. Well, what is it? This is another provocation. It is aimed at aggravating the situation in Bosnia-Herzegovina, where the topic of the prospects of members in the North Atlantic Bloc is ambiguously perceived by intendants. Well, naturally, in all sorts of ways, NATO Secretary General Rutte praised the legitimate, so-called High Representative Schmidt, whose activities, as you know, raise questions for many, because he is there without any legal grounds. He supported the presence of EU forces in the country. He expressed readiness to replace them if necessary. Like NATO, a direct quote, will not allow the emergence of a security vacuum in the country. Here, please, is the story of the European Union's mimicry in NATO and NATO's absorption of the European Union. I would also particularly like to note the absolutely cynical appeal of the NATO Secretary General to the authorities of Bosnia and Herzegovina about the need. But again, how many times have we talked about this today? Of course, to increase spending on military needs. Brussels has been holding out. Apparently, hundreds of millions have already been spent, which were obviously obtained in a corrupt way, for the purchase of American vaccines for allegedly European needs. In the context of increasing socio-economic problems in this Balkan country, as in other countries of the European Union, such recommendations seem, well, actually inappropriate, but I say again, who thinks about the citizens of the European Union countries. The behavior of the Secretary-General of the Alliance in Sarajevo is a vivid example of interference in the internal affairs of a sovereign state. The NATO emissary does not abandon plans to finally take control of all spheres of life in Bosnia and Herzegovina, in order not only to exclude any alternative points of view regarding the possibility and modality of relations between the state-forming peoples, but also to overcome the resistance of local political forces to the rapprochement of the country with the North Atlantic Alliance. Everything should be cleaned up. Everything should work for the militarization of these absolutely crazy ideas of Brussels. This refers to crazy ideas for the militarization of the European and western part of the European continent. That's all about people, about the coexistence of people of different nationalities in a complexly organized, I mean from the point of view of its history, the political structure of Bosnia and Herzegovina. NATO will not think. They never had to think about how to establish peaceful coexistence. They have completely different goals and objectives. Pakistan, we are shocked by the terrorist attack on a passenger train in the Pakistani province of Balochistan. It was committed, as you know, on the 11th of March. Innocent civilians suffered. And we, of course, strongly condemn this terrorist act, as well as any other forms of terrorism in all its manifestations. There can be no justification for the barbaric action of the militants. The perpetrators must be justly punished, and we stand in solidarity with Islamabad in the face of this global threat, and confirm our commitment to strengthening constructive cooperation with Pakistan in countering terrorism on a bilateral basis and in multilateral formats. There were questions in connection with the relevant decrees of the President of our country about our diplomatic presence in the Dominican Republic. In the context of strengthening Russia's ties with friendly Latin American regions and countries, all the procedures necessary for the opening of our country's embassy in the Dominican Republic have been completed. The presidential decree of the 11th of March appointed Alexei Viktorovich Seredin, the extraordinary authorized ambassador of our country to this state, who is going to arrive in Santo Domingo in the near future. Our bilateral contacts have historically been built on the basis of mutual respect, consideration of each other's interests, friendship, solidarity, and a pragmatic desire to develop mutually beneficial ties. On the 8th of March, our countries celebrated the 80th anniversary of the establishment of diplomatic relations. Today, Moscow and Santo Domingo successfully cooperate in a variety of areas. We support political dialogue at all levels. We are united by common cultural values, interest in the development of scientific, technical, cultural, and humanitarian ties, and tourist exchanges. And, of course, there is considerable potential in the field of trade and economic cooperation, energy, agriculture, and many other areas. We are confident that the upcoming opening of the Russian embassy in the Dominican Republic will help expand opportunities for strengthening comprehensive cooperation between our countries, as well as provide additional support to Russian citizens who are in this state and regularly visit it. March 18th, the agreement between the Russian Federation and the Republic of South Ossetia on alliance and integration, signed in Moscow in the 15th year, is 10 years old. Let me remind you that the treaty of the 15th year, which was concluded in the development of the bilateral treaty on friendship and cooperation and mutual assistance of September 17, 2008, determined the main directions of integration cooperation between our states in the political and power sphere. This includes the implementation of a coordinated foreign policy, Moscow's assistance and expansion of international relations with Kinvala, the formation of a single defense and security space, coordination of activities to counter organized crime and other dangerous types of crimes. In the socio-economic and humanitarian fields, this implies the implementation of investment programs, the integration of the customs authorities of the two countries, the adoption of measures to simplify the procedure for obtaining Russian citizenship for citizens of the Republic of South Ossetia. Currently, about 90% of the population has it, raising, with Russian support, the average salary of South Ossetian state employees, pensions of citizens of our country living in South Ossetia, and ensuring their insurance in the system of compulsory medical insurance of the Russian Federation, promoting the development of South Ossetian education, science, culture, art, sports, tourism. We evaluate the results of the implementation of the provisions of the agreement of the 2015 year positively, and this contributed to the intensification of political and interdepartmental cooperation, strengthening security on the southern borders of our country in the Transcaucasian region, and, in turn, South Ossetian conscripts and volunteers make an important contribution to the common military cause. In the zone of a special military operation, South Ossetia, with the support of our country, has achieved significant results of state building, economic growth, improving the quality of life of the population, and the annual positive dynamics is demonstrated. In the 24th year in particular, GDP increased by 9.2% compared to the 23rd year, more than twice and three times, if you count from the 2014 year. Average salary by industry, by sectors of the economy and budgetary institutions, by 17%, from the level of the 23rd year. With the funds of the next investment program, it contributes to the socio-economic development of the Republic. For the 23rd-25th years, 44 events are being successfully implemented now. Over the past time, the Treaty of 2015 year has proved its indispensability for maintaining stability in the region. Sustainable development of the young republic in close alliance with Russia. Moscow will continue to provide comprehensive assistance to Skinvali, consistently implementing together with partners this internationally important document and the bilateral sectoral agreements concluded on its basis. This fully meets the interests of the peoples of Russia, South Ossetia, peace and stability in the region, and several humanitarian, very interesting events. The 15th of March marks the 25th anniversary of the flagship project of Russian-Brazilian cultural and humanitarian cooperation, the first and only foreign school of the state academic Bolshoi Theater in the city of Zhuaibili. This is the state of Santa Catarina. For a quarter of a century of its history, an absolutely unique educational institution in every sense, has become widely known both in Brazil and in other Latin American countries. It has simply become an important element of our country's presence in the region. Graduates of this school, and I mean this educational institution, has turned into landmark training center for highly professional artists, successfully and vividly perform on leading ballet stages in 27 countries on 5 continents. Our viewers can also see and appreciate the skills of the students of this school. 9 of its graduates dance in theaters in St. Petersburg, Kazan, Perm, Samara. By the way, the leading parts are also performed. The project is very interesting and important in terms of its significance for life, cultural life inside Brazil. The school was conceived and still operates as a social project. Completely free education in this institution opens up the world of art to talented children from low-income segments of society, not only in Brazil, but also in other Latin American countries, and allows them to undergo professional ballet training. At the same time, subjects of the compulsory school curriculum are not excluded from the lesson plan, which ensures the comprehensive development of students. And, of course, it's great that the traditions of the Bolshoi Theater, which, by the way, will be celebrated next year, in the 26th, it will celebrate the heights of the 50th anniversary of the foundation, highly appreciated all over the world. This is a symbol of our culture, the Bolshoi Theater. It is a symbol of world culture. Russian opera and the national ballet were born in it. The upcoming anniversary will be widely celebrated in our country. Events dedicated to this date, with the participation of Russian foreign institutions, will also be held in foreign countries. As for the school, of course, we congratulate the management, the staff of the educational institution, everyone involved in the implementation of this project on the 25th anniversary, and wish further success, prosperity, and achievement of new heights. And there is another important humanitarian issue too. From the 5th to the 12th of May, once again, I emphasize Maya, the 59th International Mendeleev Olympiad of School Children in Chemistry, will be held in the city of Belo Horizonte in Brazil. On the basis of the Federal University of Minas Gerais, the Olympiad is traditionally organized by the Chemistry Faculty of Moscow State University, with the support of the Andrei I. Malchenko Foundation, organizer of this year's partner, Federal University of Minas Gerais, and the event is held within the framework of the Decade of Science and Technology, announced by the President of our country. It is included in the Science to Win initiative. The International Mendeleev Olympiad is one of the world's largest competitions in Olympiad chemistry. It has been held since 1967th year. In 1997th year, the Olympiad became the successor of the All-Union Olympiad of School Children in Chemistry. Retaining its numbering, the competition is attended by high school students from among the winners of national chemical Olympiads around the world. This year, Teams from more than 30 countries are expected to participate. The Russian national team traditionally shows good results at the Olympics, and in the 24th year, the competition was held in Shenzhen, China, on the basis of a joint Russian-Chinese university. Let me remind you that it was created by Lomonosov Moscow State University, Beijing Polytechnic Institute of the university, and the Municipal People's Government of Shenzhen. Then, all 10 representatives of the Russian team took prizes, received 5 gold and 5 silver medals. Therefore, we wish our participants new medals and victories. We believe in you. Well, we wish the whole event such a real spirit of friendly competition and the opportunity to show their knowledge to all the guys. So, let's move on to the questions. Is the International Life magazine with us?
Good afternoon, Maria Vladimirovna. You have already talked about the situation in Bosnia and Herzegovina in your speech. Nevertheless, I would like to ask a clarifying question. I mean your comments on the information that the BIP prosecutor's office ordered the arrest of the Bosnian Erb leader Milorad Dodik and his assistant.
You know, we, well, as you correctly said, have stopped on this topic today, and in general we regularly comment on it, because this is a real legal lawlessness. Forgive me, I remember wrinkling my nose a few years ago. Many observers say that, well, it is not necessary to include such a word in the diplomatic lexicon. No, I have to. It is he who is the legal lawlessness that for a long time subjected the legitimately elected representative of the Serbian people to such harassment. And let me remind you, this is still about a man who was a legitimately elected representative of the Serbian people of Bosnia and Herzegovina. And all this is happening against the background and in the context of a large-scale political campaign against the Republika Srpska. In other words, it's not just some, individual problems someone has with someone. It is obvious when politicization literally destroys legality. No, this is a global political attack on ethno-cultural education, on the people represented by Milorad Dodik. And in this row, another clumsy effort is aimed at accusing the president of Republika Srpska and his associates, it was written there, of attempting to destroy the constitutional system, to remove him simply from the political scene, as well as those who hinder the implementation of this Euro-Atlanticist agenda in Bosnia-Herzegovina. And it is not just imposed, it is simply imposed from above. It just seems to me, there is probably a lot at stake. So by force contrary to the law, contrary to some kind of moralism, just common sense, all this bends in such a terrible way. We regret that the Bosnian justice system is being used to settle scores with opponents, which is designed, on the contrary, to protect the rights and freedoms and fundamental principles of equality of the 3 state-forming peoples, and the 2 incidents of Bosnia and Herzegovina with broad constitutional powers, enshrined in the Dayton Peace Agreement of 1995. We have repeatedly warned, and will repeat the desire, as we are well aware, to literally abolish the Republika Srpska will have the most serious consequences for peace, security and stability both in Bosnia and Herzegovina and in the Balkans as a whole. As one of the guarantors of the Dayton Agreement, we insist on the immediate cessation of the politically motivated persecution of the legitimate leaders of the Republika Srpska, the return of the situation to the legal field, the restoration of dialogue between the peoples of Bosnia and Herzegovina, and the elimination of dangerous and destructive interference by Western forces. We know President Dodik and his associates as true patriots of their people, and some attempts to come up with stories about them and about their ties with our country. They break down only about one thing. They are shattered by their true patriotism towards their own compatriots, fellow citizens, representatives of the people who entrusted them with the most important powers and responsibility to resolve their destinies, so long suffering, so difficult. And everything that is being done by these people, I mean by President Dodik, his associates on the external circuit, is aimed not just that there is nothing wrong with it, only good, but not only and not just at developing relations, maintaining friendly, mutually beneficial contacts, but first of all for the realization of the rights and freedoms of their people. Yes, I think they can be called that, fighters for the rights and interests of the Serbian people. I sincerely wish and believe that they will be able to overcome all the machinations, difficulties, and all, I don't know, some trials that have fallen to their lot, with honor and dignity.
Thank you very much.
Ria Novosti is with us. Yes, Maria Vladimirovna, hello. We have one question for you today. Yes, hello. The fact that the West has repeatedly accused Russia of abusing the use of the veto in voting in the UN Security Council. Could you please provide data on exactly how many times Russia has used the veto since the 91st year, and data on how often the draft resolutions of the UN Security Council, the United States, France, and the United Kingdom are quoted? You know, before I give you statistics, I will say the following. After all, this is not just statistics, so to speak, factual. You also need to understand the internal mechanics. And according to the American diplomats themselves, who worked either with this, I mean, at the UN headquarters, representing their country, and in their memoirs, American politicians, including political scientists and analysts, talked about how they sometimes deliberately provoked other countries, first of all our country, to vitalize obviously impassable materials precisely in order to create these very statistics of the use of the veto. Let's talk about everything in more detail. Let's start this conversation then from 1991. From this historical stage, Russia has used the veto 39 times. The United States used the veto 22 times during the same period, and China 18 times. The British and the French, as to other permanent members of the UN Security Council, have not formally used the right of veto over the past 3 or 4 years. That is, they did not use it. But here, as they say, again you need to look at the details, because it seems to me that once again the devil is there. Let's explain these statistics and mechanics, keeping in mind that the current configuration of the Security Council, it allows Western countries to use the so-called hidden veto. According to paragraph 3 of Article 27 of the Charter of the United Nations, decisions of the Council on issues, on all matters except procedural, are considered prince if there are 9 votes in favor, including, as noted there, the concurring votes of all permanent members. The Western countries, including their allies, actually have a numerical advantage in the Security Council, which allows them to block any initiatives they do not like without using the veto tool as such, simply by majority. In other words, they simply do not allow the document to gain the specified required number of votes. The key point is that our country has always treated the veto not as a privilege, but as an essential mechanism of the work of the Security Council. He who stimulates, pushes, inspires his members to search for compromises. Moscow. So, strictly speaking, this is exactly how the right of veto was conceived, as something resembling, as a kind of, a warning light that demonstrates to the world community that it failed to reach an agreement, and it is necessary to return to the negotiating table and continue working further to find solutions, compromises, agreements, and so on. Moscow is fully aware of its responsibility as a permanent member of the Security Council, and uses, and will continue to use the right of veto as conscientiously as possible, only in extreme cases, purely in the interests of developing long-term fair solutions. And, by the way, in this regard, the situation can be considered indicative when considering the American draft resolution of the UN Security Council on the situation around Ukraine of February 24th of this year. Remember, then Washington introduced a concise text calling for a speedy and early settlement of the conflict. And, this is fundamentally important, without accusations against Russia. However, the British, as earlier in the same day at the UN General Assembly, tried to introduce into this text, divorced from reality, formulations with accusations of our country, naturally, with selective quoting of the Charter of the United Nations. And, of course, Russia was forced to quote these amendments in order not to allow the generally constructive undertaking to turn into an unacceptable anti-Russian document, which was fraught with distancing the prospects for resolving the crisis, and not approaching it, as was initially indicated in the draft brought to the Security Council one way or another. Well, it seems to me that all these discussions about the statistics of the use of the veto in general, so to speak, the history of the veto should not overshadow the key problem, namely, non-compliance with the resolutions of the UN Security Council that have already been adopted. I should probably explain what this is about. Look at how much attention the same mainstream Western media, with the submission of Western analysts, pays to how much Russia has been quoted, how much Russia has withdrawn from the run of draft resolutions, and so on. Why are they not scrupulously digging into the number of UN Security Council resolutions that have been adopted? Sometimes unanimously, sometimes without the approval of all members, but by the majority. But at the same time, they are not implemented or implemented in a distorted form, and there are also those that, unlike or contrary to what is written there, are not considered as a guide to action at all, although they are obliged to be executed by the entire world community, and the countries that voted for, and sometimes even co-sponsored these resolutions, are doing exactly the opposite to the spirit and letter of the documents they voted for, or even worked on. Can you imagine? And no one pays any attention to this story. They do not give any statistics, and so on. If you ask if there are concrete examples, yes, the clearest example is, of course, the situation with the Minsk agreements, which took the form of a UN Security Council resolution in support of the agreements that were reached in Minsk at that time. And these same countries, which in fact either participated in one way or another in the development of the Minsk agreements of the 15th year, or at the Security Council table, they raised their hand for this document. They acted against this document after its adoption, not indirectly violating it, but directly opposing its implementation. Moreover, as it was later found out, the countries, including France, which participated in the development of the Minsk agreements, were their guarantors and also are and were at that time a permanent member of the Security Council, misled the world community about the fact that, as the French president said, at that time participated in the Minsk in the Alland process. They were not going to implement them either as the Minsk agreements, or as the Minsk agreements enshrined in the Security Council resolution. That's really what the key problem is. Therefore, if we conduct investigations, we need to conduct them. I mean, if such analytical reviews are to be made of this problem, then it should be treated comprehensively, not just as a matter of statistics, and not just as a matter of the intricacies of international law, procedural tricks, problems with the obvious need to reform the institutions of the United Nations. This problem needs to be treated, as I have already said, in a broad format. It depends on what? Well, unsolvable situations there are today, which neither the reform of the Security Council nor any statistical changes will help.
которым не помогут ни реформирование Совета Безопасности, ни, так сказать, статистические какие-то изменения.
This is a question of the destructive mentality, complex messages of those who consider both the United Nations and international law not as a tool for finding a peaceful settlement, but as a tool for realizing not just their narrow-minded goals, but really inflicting strategic defeat on the world peace.
Миру во всем мире стратегического поражения.
Thank you, thank you. Listen, Hua is with us.
Yes. Hello, Maria Vladimirovna. I have such a question for you.
Yes, hello. I'm listening.
Hello. Well, recently the US State Department has updated the fact sheet from Taiwan posted on the official website. In other words, the previous wording that the US does not support Taiwan's independence has been removed. How would you comment on this as an official representative?
It is precisely as an official representative of the Russian Foreign Ministry that I would like to draw attention first of all to the fact that Russia's principled position on the Taiwan issue is well known and unchanged, and has been repeatedly consolidated at the highest level. Let me repeat it again. Taiwan is an integral part of China. The government of the People's Republic of China is its only law, the government. In addition, I would like to remind you that Moscow and Beijing consistently support each other on issues related to the protection of sovereignty and territorial integrity, as well as closely cooperate in the field of security. This is primary. This is the most important thing I would like to say. As for the actions you asked about, they are nothing but an obvious violation of international law, including by the Americans themselves, because they violate the One China principle. The United States of America, its allies, are concluding new arms supply contracts with Taiwan, as you probably well know, strengthening political contacts at various levels with the island, but they are doing this not for cooperation, but just to create such an atmosphere of tension in this region, and an instrument of pressure on Beijing, on China, on the Chinese people. Both such mechanics and such ideology in general contradict Washington's earlier commitments regarding this region of the PERC, and, accordingly, also fuel separatist sentiments. You said you still have questions.
No, thank you. Thank you very much.
Yes, good. So is the TV channel Rush Today with us. Good afternoon, Maria Vladimirovna. Hello. We wanted to ask the following question. Against the background of the renewed Russian-American dialogue and the change in the rhetoric of the United States under President Trump regarding the Russian Federation, in your opinion, with what what is the probability that relations between Moscow and Washington will be able to become equal and mutually beneficial from the confrontation? And in your opinion, can we already observe signals that anticipate such a development of events on the part of Washington? Thank you. You know, I think it's necessary to take into account all the signals, of course, but it seems to me that it is necessary to focus primarily on actions and concrete steps, on concrete actions, not because we don't want to believe in the best, but because we have already witnessed, unfortunately, how words diverge from deeds, or then the meanings embedded in these words are distorted. Therefore, I repeat once again, we read the signals, we note the positive rhetoric, we support a positive, constructive attitude aimed at the world of cooperation and mutual understanding both on the part of the current US administration and, strictly speaking, from any side, no matter where it comes from. But we also focus on the specific steps of the case. And it is through their implementation that we form the appropriate policy, foreign policy, policy towards. I mean, on a two-way basis, on a two-way track, and so on. Thank you very much. Thank you. Liz Vestia is with us. Yes, hello. Maria Vladimirovna, a Secretary of State Mark Rubio said that the American side intends to prevent the use of hostile rhetoric against Russia at a meeting of foreign ministers of the Group of 7 countries. Tell me, did Moscow appreciate such a step, and can we say that Washington has begun to assess the situation in Ukraine more soberly? Let's then divide into two questions. By the way, we have already noted that even within the framework of the G20, in general, American representatives, although they did not delegate the head of the US State Department there, but were represented at the level of the ambassador in the relevant country, sounded without the aggression inherent in previous administrations. Russophobia were set up differently. In other words, these processes or these symptoms are already obvious, and we have already recorded them. Well, accordingly, the statements of the American representatives were recorded, which, I say again, are constructive in nature, which are aimed at dialogue, at maintaining contacts and relations. We have noted, and it has been noted at the highest level in our country. Your second question was related to whether it is possible to say that Washington has begun to assess the situation in Ukraine more realistically, more soberly. Well, I think who better than the team that has now come to the White House to know what is really happening in Ukraine? I think the previous team knew perfectly well what was going on there. It's just that the goals and objectives of the team of Obama, Biden, and everyone who was part of it were different than they declared them. That's the problem. They talked about allegedly supporting democracy in Ukraine, but they killed it, this democracy in Ukraine, because they distorted everything, both the electoral system and the political processes that were supposed to reflect the opinion of the people living in Ukraine, but turned into some kind of political tag, with the participation of NATO countries in the first place. They talked about the economic prosperity of Ukraine. In fact, they pushed it to militarization, to confrontation in the region. They talked about respecting the law. As a result, they literally rewritten Ukrainian laws under dictation. They said that they respected the sovereignty of Ukraine. In fact, they completely subordinated the Kiev regime to their will and destroyed Ukrainian independence, making this country dependent in all directions and on all fronts. Therefore, the Biden administration was also aware of what was happening in Ukraine. And I am more than aware, because in many ways I implemented my own project there, as this case has been done repeatedly around the world in historical periods by one or another White House team. Therefore, both the current team and the previous team in the White House, they know what is going on there. They treat it differently. And this, as a matter of fact, is even openly talked about. I would like to emphasize once again that the previous team in the White House hid their true intentions and needed a tool to implement their corruption fabrications and their corruption schemes. They needed a tool to solve domestic political problems in the United States of America. For this, Russophobia was also needed. For this, the conflict around Ukraine was needed, and so on. They needed a tool in the form of the Kiev regime to implement their geopolitical attitudes, and so on, and so on. And they gave it all out as support for the supposedly young, gaining strength of the Ukrainian economy. democracy, and, I don't know, subjectivity in international affairs there. And the current team highlights the true approaches of the previous administration, talking about corruption, saying that what was given out as promises was not such, and exactly diverged from the true goals and objectives. Therefore, I don't think it's necessary to say that this or that team was outside the real agenda. They were on the real agenda. They really know what's going on there. In particular, look now at the documents that have been uncovered and are uncovering corruption stories and financing of those areas that killed democratic processes, including in Ukraine. The same documents were signed and accepted, implemented under the previous administration. She could not help but know, and these documents are being opened under the current US administration. Accordingly, they also know what is happening there and share it with the international community. Therefore, both of them knew. They treated it differently. In this sense, I agree with you. Of course, there is a difference here. Thank you. Thank you. Is Reuter with us?
Maria Vladimirovna, good afternoon.
Yes, hello.
We have two questions, and, accordingly, the first one concerns the topic that you have already voiced, namely the negotiations on Jeddah between the United States and Ukraine. And so, in particular, to what extent are the results of these negotiations acceptable to Russia, in particular? The provision on a 30-day truce, and what the counter-conditions may be. Russia.
You know, we are not, as I have already said, guided by the public statements that have been made. We analyze them, but we consider them as public rhetoric. What is ready to offer us should be considered not at the microphones, but in the appropriate offices during the relevant contacts. This has not happened yet. As I said at the beginning of the briefing, and I repeat it now, we have not yet been officially notified of the results of this event, or anything else on this track. But, as I have already said, we do not exclude, and I would even say, we can confirm that such contacts are planned, including for the near future and possibly today. Then, we will comment on what we hear, see, read, get acquainted, and so on.
Thank you very much. And the second question concerns the situation in Syria.
Now I'm sorry, going back to the previous topic. You understand that the information sphere is used by the Kiev regime, including as an introduction, so to speak, and on the information track of military operations against our country. You understand that perfectly well, from the misinformation they throw in to cyberattacks. Yesterday it was already obvious that the flags set up in the liberated settlements of the Kursk region are presented, listen, only by the Kiev regime as allegedly relocating the APU in order to have the best maneuverability there, and so on and so on. In other words, even in these obvious things, they are always trying to find some tricks, clues, conduct some kind of disinformation operation, and so on and so on. Therefore, we see everything, hear everything, take everything into account, analyze everything. But, as I said today, we will focus on what we hear from them officially. I mean not from the Kiev regime, but from those who will represent the American side.
Thank you very much. And the second question is about the situation in Syria. In particular, what efforts Russia is making to resolve the situation there. With which countries and parties it talks about this, if it is negotiating. And does Russia allow for any interference in the intra-Syrian conflict, in addition to the political and diplomatic one, including, possibly jointly with other countries, such as the United States, Israel, which says that it would like Russia to maintain a military base in Syria, or maybe with Turkey?
As you know, we consistently advocate the consolidation of international efforts in the interests of a comprehensive settlement of the crisis in the Syrian Arab Republic. We always emphasize the need for strict observance of the sovereignty, unity, and territorial integrity of this country. The relevance of these tasks is very complex, very difficult, but it has increased even more in light of the recent tragic events in western Syria, which have also been assessed. We maintain active contacts for the long-term stabilization of the situation in the Syrian Arab Republic, with our partners in the region, with the Arab states, with Turkey, with Iran. The Syrian issue was discussed in detail during the visit of the Russian foreign minister to Ankara, Tehran, and Doha. You have seen all these materials. We are open to establishing cooperation in the Syrian direction with all constructive countries. Now, as for the United States, recently, as you probably know, together with the Americans, we initiated urgent consultations of the UN Security Council on Syria. The discussion that took place showed that with regard to the latest aggravation of the situation in the west of this country, the majority of the members of the Security Council speak from similar positions. The commonality of approaches, of course, gives hope that it is possible that common sense and understanding of the need to work together in the interests of solving the Syrian and other pressing problems of the Middle East will prevail in the West. Therefore, the work is underway.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Liana Dalu is with us.
Maria Vladimirovna, good afternoon.
Yes, hello.
We also have a question about Ukraine. European countries, in particular Britain, France, and the European Union, supported the proposal for a 30-day truce in Ukraine, following the results of the US-Ukrainian negotiations in Saudi Arabia, taking into account the position of these countries, which is to continue.
And can you wait? And can you please forgive me? And can I interrupt you here for a second? That's what you said, given the position of these countries. But is it really necessary? Is it true that the above-mentioned countries, the above-mentioned England, France, and most of the countries of the European Union, have done in order to take their position into account? But they had a chance. Both France and Germany, which is a member of the European Union, have an influence on preventing escalation for 7 years. They were not just observers, they were not just advisors, they were guarantors. What? Guarantors. Guarantors of the Minsk process and the Minsk agreements. But even earlier, they were the guarantors of the internal Ukrainian political process. They also guaranteed this kind of transitional state, of the transfer of power from the legitimate authorities to those whom they supported, passing it off as democratic transformations and so on. They failed everywhere. They failed on the Maidan with their alleged efforts, aimed at all good things. They failed, and as guarantors of the Minsk agreements. They, returning to the previous question, your colleagues failed. And even as executors, he is obliged to implement the Security Council resolution by the entire international community. So back to your question, and why is it necessary, or even possible for us to listen, or, as you would say, take into account the positions of these countries? How did they reinforce the relevance of their approaches? Maybe there are some of their merits in the peaceful settlement. Here we are talking about France now, about Germany inside the European Union. And how has Britain, so to speak, earned our trust on this track? Is it because Boris Johnson, as British Prime Minister, flew to Ukraine in the midst of negotiations that had every chance of resolving the situation and dissuaded the Kiev regime from their further introduction? What has official London done over all these years so that we take into account their position in this direction? Therefore, I believe that, in principle, it makes no sense to continue this issue further, because that's not the point. But the point is in their principled approaches. if they wanted to play another scene, if they needed another information noise, if they wanted to play this card in some way. They will not succeed. We are well aware of their principled approaches. If they have their own principled approaches, which are based on the escalation of the situation, Russophobia, such, anti-Russianism, I would even say. But if they change this, then we will take it into account, and so far, frankly, there are no prerequisites for us to take into account such their hysterical opinion.
Even without taking into account whether this does not go against or is not what European countries are not trying to achieve.
One more time.
In particular, with regard to the truce. European countries are trying to achieve this.
This for what?
Well, so that there was a truce. Here, and considering the Russian position.
Wait, these are the same Britain, France, and representatives of the European Union who every day declare that they are supplying weapons. They should supply even more weapons, as they believe, to the Kiev regime. Are these the same countries? What are you talking about? Where is the word peace? Where is the word peace in the militaristic aspirations of Ursula von der Leyen? Where is the word peace in the extremely paramilitary statements of representatives of individual countries of the European Union? Where is the word peace in these very nuclear umbrellas, so to speak, of Macron? Where? I didn't see it. Where is there about the world? Where is at least one document, at least one statement, at least some kind of conference on this subject? I've heard about conferences on some supposedly victory plan. I've heard about Zelensky's troubles. I have heard about certain peaceful formulas, which were just the formulas of war. And as for the real world, a sustainable peace process, given the root causes of the crisis, given the human rights that they care so much about, given the huge number of problems created by themselves, I have not heard.
Thanks for the answer.
Thank you. Is there a Belarusian with us? Info.
Good afternoon, Maria Vladimirovna.
Hello.
There is an active information campaign going on about how, just now, she said that Russia needs a truce in Ukraine, but not peace. And don't you think that the Americans and Europeans want to deceive us, as they deceived us with the Minsk agreements for the rearmament of Ukraine, and for the subsequent more active hot phase of the war with Russia? In this regard, the question is, why is Trump so actively insisting on a truce? In other words, why does the US president need a truce to Ukraine?
You know well, you have 3 tracks here that I think I can answer. First of all, I'm following the news and I want to share this news with you. The Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation announced the release of the same in the Kursk region, the settlements of Moldavia and Podol. This, it seems to me, is a good answer to many questions that were asked today and will continue to be deceived. We are doing what has been stated as our goals and objectives, and our country implements them. And once again, I would like to draw your attention to the statements made yesterday by the President of the Russian Federation, Vladimir Putin, in the Kursk region. Our people live by these statements, these words, these theses, and you talk about being deceived, not deceived. We listen, we don't listen. We take into account, we don't take into account. That's what we take into account. That's what we're waiting for. That's what we all strive for. This is the first one. Second, what does the Trump administration want? What does President Trump want? He has repeatedly said that this is a slaughterhouse, which was built by his predecessors, among others. Then remember the quotes yourself. Unnecessary, insane, unnecessary to anyone, meaningless, and so on. He has repeatedly explained it himself. What they want now, we will hear from them when they arrive in our country and share their thoughts specifically on the plot of Jeddah.
Thank you, Maria Vladimirovna.
Thank you. Let's move on. Whether the tape is with us, Ru.
Yes, hello, Maria Vladimirovna.
Hello.
There was already a question about the reaction of European politicians to the JIG talks, but I wanted to draw their attention specifically to one formulation. Thus, the head of the European diplomacy calls, French President Macron, and British Prime Minister Starmer, welcomed the negotiations between the United States and Ukraine and said that the ball, as always, is on Russia's side. How can you comment on the wording of European politicians following the results of the GG talks?
Well, as another inappropriate way to informatively form a distorted view of the situation. That's what I would say. I don't even want to be ironic about it. The most difficult crisis in which those who have now made such statements, played not the last, but the first role. They decided to become curators of Ukraine. They decided to play a game of political modeling of a young democracy, just rising on the wing. They decided, in fact, to mock the Ukrainian people. And now, of course, seeing, and the whole world sees, what their project has turned into, that it has not only completely failed, but God be with it, that it has plunged an entire nation of Ukrainians into the abyss of madness, with absolutely no way out of sight for them. I'm not saying a way out of the current situation. Everything is already obvious here, that this is a dead end for the Kiev regime, but even with the development for the future, they come up with some information methods, some formulations and political gags, in order, so to speak, to show themselves from the least worst side. And it turns out that this is bad for the EU representatives, because at the same time, as I have already said, they raise the stakes in the escalation of the situation, inflate these very budgets for military spending to some simply unrealistic figures for them, increase aggressive rhetoric against our country, introduce, develop, invent, implement all new sanctions packages. Therefore, do not play with words, and do not play with words. All this Brussels, so to speak, the world's minority has already played with them. They should just be realistic about things. They have to admit that this crisis has been fueled by them for many years and modeled by them. They have to admit their criminal mistakes in this direction. Then it will be a real conversation on the case. And we know the price of coming up with formulations. I mean, the Westerners and the EU come up with formulations. We know the price of this.
Thank you very much.
They should be talking now not with these very phrases, memes. They should now take out photos of dead children who died from their own weapons supplied to them. They should have put photos of literally newborns who died under the shelling of NATO weapons behind their own stands. They would like to hold exhibitions for children, mothers, old people who have become victims of their greed, madness, and criminal logic of dividing the world into those who are destined to live supposedly in a beautiful garden, and all the others who are destined for the jungle. They should do this. They should inventory their mistakes, and then start doing work, and not engage in another information engineering. They had a chance, as I said, for many years to prove themselves as the EU, as the European Union, as the western part of Europe, on the track of a peaceful settlement. And our country gave them this chance by offering the Minsk agreements. They didn't just miss it. They signed that they had deceived the whole world. In fact, They deceived themselves, because now they live with this stigma as deceivers, as people who mocked the whole people, the people of Ukraine, and deceived the world, saying that they were going to implement the Minsk agreements, but, in fact, they violated international law, since this resolution was the UN-Security Council, and they violated all the norms of morality and ethics in international relations, and indeed at the civilizational level, given the scale of the tragedy that they themselves brought to the world, arguing on the maiden, supporting nationalist feelings, reincarnating Nazism, turning it into neo-Nazism.
Рассуждая на Майданах, поддерживая националистические чувства, реинкарнируя нацизм, превращая его в неонацизм.
That's what they need to do now.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Is the Media Corporation of China with us?
Yes, Maria Vladimirovna, good afternoon. In general, you have already answered all our questions. Nevertheless, with your permission, I will still ask one general question. Maybe you will have something to add. But in the wake of the negotiations of the American-Ukrainian delegations, you have already said in the introductory part that you have not yet been officially informed about their results, as far as I understand. Nevertheless, it is against the background of what is happening, how the Russian side views the prospects for reaching a final peace agreement. Do you think there are certain ways or conditions now, at this point, I mean, for Russia and Ukraine to return to the negotiating table?
You know, well, you correctly said that I have already commented on a lot of this today, and you have raised the question so broadly and globally that it seems to me that we really need to wait for the announced one today. The announced communication of the President of Russia with the media, the announcement by the press secretary of the President, Dmitry Sergeyevich Peskov. It seems to me that these issues will be touched upon there.
Thank you.
Obviously, based on journalistic interest in this topic.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Is Radio Saga with us? Probably not with us. So, Moscow Post is with us in the summer. Yes, hello. We have two questions today. The first one, are there any chances that as a result of the renewal of the dialogue between Russia and the United States, representatives of American business will attend the St. Petersburg Economic Forum in the 25th year? Is there any work going on in this direction? I just have a day of discoveries today and a day of such a question to questions. And you know that the previous administration, which experienced just such Russophobic writhing, American businessmen came to the St. Petersburg Economic Forum in the course. They have been participants of the St. Petersburg Forum in recent years, regardless of the geopolitical situation. I am referring to the American business community. So here you just need to know it. It's a fact. Okay, got it, thanks. Then I'll move on to the second question. We have never discriminated against businesses. We have always said and emphasized that we consider regimes to be unfriendly. We consider unfriendly, sometimes hostile, those who pursue appropriate policies, make appropriate statements, violate the laws of our country. Here they were called unfriendly. Sanctions were imposed against them, mainly in response. They were, so to speak, placed in the corresponding stop lists, also mainly responsible. Criminal cases have also been opened against them, but never, well, on the fact of a crime. We have often talked about this, but we have never discriminated against business representatives on the basis of belonging to a particular country, nor representatives of the humanitarian sphere, nor cultural or scientific figures. You know that very well. We have always been against the culture of cancellation or cancellation of culture. We have always said that this is an absolutely crazy story. Therefore, this also fully applies to economic forums. Therefore, we are open to cooperation with business representatives from all countries. They will come, they will not come, this is their decision. But you will never find, and will not give a single example of what would be denied to someone on the basis of nationality or on the basis of belonging to the citizenship of a country. We are fundamentally opposed to this approach. So the answer is obvious. So, you said you still have a question. Thank you. And the next question is about the murder of religious minorities in the series. Is there any information about the presence of Russian citizens among the victims? Are there any additional measures required by the Foreign Ministry to protect our citizens and diplomatic workers, who remain all? As you know, the situation is extremely complicated. I can remind you that Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov spoke in detail on this topic at a press conference on March 11th. We are monitoring this situation, and further, we are really shocked by the tragic events that have taken place in Syria. The victims were innocent civilians. The use of violence against civilians is categorically unacceptable. It cannot be justified by anything. As for our assessments, they are, as I have already said, principled. We can only repeat them and, probably, proceed from the development of the situation, adjust them according to a specific texture, but the essence remains fundamentally. We are certainly concerned about the developments in Syria, and we strongly condemn these massacres. Of course, we sympathize with the families of the victims, and you are absolutely right to ask a question about the citizens of Russia, because there are a lot of appeals from our citizens, from our compatriots, and from citizens of other states. Of course, from the citizens of Syria first of all, from just caring people around the world, and questions, and the most important call to help. You know, these are hundreds of letters that we receive through our embassies outside the central office, and even a proactive response was given to these calls. The fact is that, as you know, the Russian Khmeimim airbase opened its doors to local residents who were looking for salvation from pogroms. They were looking for salvation, simply realizing that it was a matter of life and death. And our military sheltered more than 8,000. These are statistics as of yesterday. More than 8,000, maybe even closer to 9,000 Syrians. We are mainly talking about women and children. And I think this is the best answer to the question of our real contribution to the fate of the Syrians. We proceed from the fact that the current authorities in Damascus are aware of their responsibility to ensure the protection and legitimate rights of all Syrian citizens, regardless of their religious affiliation. And, of course, we are closely monitoring their efforts to equalize the situation with law and order. You have probably seen that the Syrian leadership has confirmed, and has done so publicly, its commitment to preserving the national unity. Well, here it includes not only the issue of nationalities, but also the multi-confessional nature of Syria. A special commission has been set up to establish the circumstances of the incident, and we hope that in the course of an objective investigation, the perpetrators will be identified and will be punished as they deserve. Ensuring civil peace and harmony is the most important task facing the Syrian authorities in the difficult conditions of the so-called transition period. It depends on how successfully they cope with this, and I'm sure there will be no challenge. There are already a lot of them. The future of the Syrian Arab Republic largely depends, and we are convinced that the way to a sustainable settlement of the Syrian crisis lies through the establishment of a comprehensive political process with the participation of representatives of all political forces, and, of course, all ethnic and religious groups of this country. And for our part, we have consistently supported the sovereignty, unity, and territorial integrity of Syria in light of the aggravation of the military-political situation in this country. Ensuring the safety of Russian citizens and Russian facilities located in this country is an absolute priority, and to this end, we maintain the necessary contacts with the current Syrian authorities. I have no information about any specific cases related to whether or not there were victims among Russian citizens. But I want to say again that this is a priority topic for us, and everything is being done to ensure the safety of both citizens of our country and Russian facilities. Thank you. Thank you is international with us.
Hello, Maria Vladimirovna.
Yes, hello.
My question. In Italy, a petition for our colleagues from the internet caused a big scandal. Some politicians even called on the police to take measures against the Belarusian. And the President of the Republic of Italy said that Russia threatens Europe with a special weapon. In your comments,
Nuclear.
weapons. Do you have any in the comments?
So you want to tell me that the President of Italy— Did I write it down correctly? The Italian president said that Russia allegedly threatens Europe with nuclear weapons.
Yes.
That's a lie. That's a lie. It's not true. It's fake. It's disinformation. I have given you all the words. Choose the one that you think is the most descriptive, or use all of them. This is one time. Secondly, you have to answer for these words. You as a journalist, I don't know. A blogger, a journalist, I see that you represent a news agency. You may well ask the President of Italy, on what basis did he allow himself such a lie? Maybe he will deign to confirm his words in some way, but I can tell you right away, he will not be able to do it. He will not find a single statement, not a single official in the Russian Federation, which could be interpreted in this way. Moreover, the third point is the Russian leadership. The president of our country, authorized ministers, authorized statesmen of our country have repeatedly spoken on this topic and have done everything to disavow such fakes. And we will definitely make references to these statements in the text of today's briefing. The next moment, it surprises me that perhaps the President of Italy confused us with some other country, although I understand that we cannot be confused with anyone. But maybe he meant that this France threatens Europe with nuclear weapons. Because this is exactly how one could interpret the statements that were made by French President Macron just a couple of days ago, when he talked about the disclosure of a certain nuclear umbrella over Europe. I remember in France, there was a movie Prick with an umbrella. This is, a prick with a nuclear umbrella, which, it seems to me, many people perceived exactly like that after Macron's statement. Why did the words of a neighboring state on the official level, uttered on the topic of nuclear weapons, not cause any excitement? But they, were said with obvious aggressive overtones in neighboring countries, in the neighboring countries of the European Union, in the member states of the European Union. And at the same time, fantasies begin again on the topic of alleged threats from Russia using, which is not true, nuclear weapons. But I want to tell you, I know the answer to this question. Why is this done? Precisely because we need to keep the topic of Russophobia, the anti-Russian agenda afloat. We need some facts. There are no such facts. How to convince the population of Western European countries that Russia is supposedly bad? We need to invent stories about what Russia allegedly threatens. How does Russia threaten the countries of the European Union? With our affordable and high-quality energy raw materials, which we have been selling to the countries of the European Union for many years, with our economic and humanitarian projects with the countries of the European Union. What does Russia threaten, in particular, Italy? The fact that it interacts with Italian business. The fact that Italian business has its own companies, its representative offices here. They profit from our country. Are we threatening this? No, of course not. But in order to create a sense of this imaginary threat, you need to talk about this topic endlessly. We see exactly the same thing, not only from our Western neighbors, but also from the Eastern ones. Look at the rhetoric and listen to it, these statements from the official Tokyo, which constantly appeals to the topic of the nuclear aggression of the United States against its own cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, for some reason weaves the topic of Russia. What does Russia have to do with it? This is not the Soviet Union. This is not the Russian Federation. They dropped nuclear bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. It was the United States of America, but precisely in order to take out of historical brackets the truly guilty of the first use of nuclear weapons against civilians, namely the United States, and put innocent Russia in the place of the guilty, they constantly juggle words. It's the same here. Thank you. Lee News is with us. Ru.
Maria Vladimirovna website. Ru and Pavel Vorobyov, we are with you, and today we have two questions for you. The first one is like that. Ex-German Chancellor Angela Merkel here called for a dialogue with Russia on Ukraine, and, in her opinion, Europe should use diplomacy to settle, for which it is necessary to discuss a number of issues with Moscow. But you have already noted that we all remember how in the 22nd year Merkel recognized that the Minsk agreements were concluded only to gain time to strengthen the Ukrainian army. And in your opinion, is it worth trusting the diplomatic efforts of the former chancellor now, taking into account such past confessions?
I believe that it is necessary to proceed from concrete cases. Words, especially those who have already deceived, have no faith. I think that it is necessary to proceed from concrete actions and concrete steps taken by certain political figures, statesmen, and specifically focus on them. It seems to me that this is already obvious, and it seems to me that I am definitely not revealing a big secret here, because this position, in my opinion, has been voiced many times already.
Thank you. And the second question is this. You have already reported that the OSCE delegation that arrived in Moscow demonstrated the consequences of the Apu drone attack on residential buildings in the Moscow region. Could you comment on the reaction of the delegation and the Secretary General of the organization, of Mr. Sinerly Ugly, to what he saw?
I think he answered this question himself during a press conference. It was important for us to demonstrate this to him, so that there would be no reason for the OSCE Secretary to say later that they do not know something. Now they know a lot directly. There is such a thing as field research. Here directly, so to speak, as part of their field research. They got this opportunity. It seems to me that here again we need to put the question in a different way. The main and important thing here, the main thing is not only and not so much in the reaction of the OSCE Secretary General. He is a completely new person. He just came to the office. He's only been there for a month. It seems to me, trying to get used to the new function somehow. It's only been a month. What is important is another thing, and the main problem is the deep crisis into which the NATO members drove the OSCE, and, accordingly, the European Union thereby gross violation, ignoring all the original goals of this structure, and simply destroying the consensus-agreed principles on which its work is based. That's what's important, and that's what is dominant. He is the Secretary General, but it is the member countries. these most aggressive world minority that distort the organization's activities, simply destroying it from within.
Well, thank you very much for the answers.
Thank you. Leah Bolt News is with us. Hello, Maria Vladimirovna. The 16th of March is approaching. Every year on this day, a procession of veterans of the Latvian Waffen-SS Legion and supporters takes place in the Latvian capital. What tools can Russia use to counteract the glorification of Nazism in the Baltic states? And why do you think the EU and the UN are not taking decisive measures to ban this? It seems to me that we have entered into the textbook of world history. I mean, here is the one that consists of pages of daily efforts, an entire chapter dedicated to the fight against neo-Nazism. It is our country, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and our diplomats who are accredited at international venues in various countries. All these years, not a year, not two, not three, not five, not 10, but 4 decades, we have been drawing attention to this issue and doing everything to make it a topic of international relations and the agenda of international organizations. And for this we have used a wide arsenal of political and diplomatic means to counteract revisionist policies. In particular, Latvia, its authorities, as you correctly said, continue to condone the holding of these same processions of former Waffen-SS legionnaires from year to year, and including pandering to free planting, or even not free. This is incorrectly said. And this, you know, aggressive planting of ideology by the admirers of all these processions, all these structures, firm among the local right-wing radical organizations. On a systematic basis, Russia attracts the attention of the world community to this phenomenon through public statements of the ministry's leadership, through prepared reports, through raising issues in international organizations. We invariably emphasize that Riga's cynical policy of praising Nazi criminals runs counter to the fundamental norms of international law, grossly contradicts the decisions of the Nuremberg Tribunal. Latvia's international legal obligations to counter Russian and xenophobic tendencies. Of course, active work is being carried out at the sites that you mentioned. The OSCE, the annual resolution submitted by Russia on combating the glorification of Nazism, aimed at solving this very task, receives broad international support at the United Nations platform. Concern is not expressed about the glorification of the Nazi movement, neo-Nazism, and former members of the Waffen-SS organization, including in the form of public demonstrations. This document always emphasizes the recommendation of the Special Rapporteurs of the UN Human Rights Council on contemporary forms of racism against states to prohibit, direct quote, any solemn honoring of both the official and unofficial nature of the Nazi regime, its allies, and related organizations, end quote. And it also operationally states the need for the state to take measures to counteract any honoring of Nazi SS organizations and all its constituent parts, including the Waffen-SS. In addition, the Special Rapporteur, by the way, is also instructed on an annual basis to prepare reports on the implementation of this resolution for submission to the UN General Assembly and the UN Human Rights Council. Russia, like many other states, contributes to the content of this document. Our country regularly expresses Latvia's claims in a bilateral format, although, as you understand, we have not had full-fledged relations for a long time, although there are still some kind of diplomatic contacts, so to speak, but it is impossible to call them full-fledged because of their position. Not a single revisionist trick of Riga remains without a proper reaction on our part. In particular, Russia has sent diplomatic notes to all 3 Baltic states as part of the statement of pretrial claims regarding the violation by these countries of their obligations under the International Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination. Who did it, except our country? Nobody. Not because it doesn't exist, I mean problems, but because it requires proactive efforts, which we demonstrate as for, among other things, The facts of the glorification of Nazism, including honoring veterans of the Waffen SS. This is also included in the mentioned claims. Now, as for the European Union, no one is really going to pay attention to the monstrous situation with the glorification of Nazism in the Baltic states. And this is not a question of the fact that they do not want to take out the trash from the hut, or want to solve it all behind the scenes, or, as they say, without working for the public, specifically proceed to minimize the damage. Nothing like that. It's not like that. The fact is that this is the very new normality, the new ethics that flourishes there. That is, tolerance of Nazism. And why is this happening? It stems from Brussels' conscious line of rewriting history. Of course, first of all, the history of the Second World War for us is the Great Patriotic War. And why? Yes, because the principles that, unfortunately, then took root, and then also bore fruit in the Third Reich, also did not go anywhere, so to speak, from the space of all these North Atlantic blocks. And what are these principles? The division of people into those who are supposed to and who are not supposed to do anything ever. Now this formula has been rewired about a beautiful garden and a wild jungle performed by Barrel. This is an ideology that has not gone anywhere, that there is a certain golden billion, and everyone else should work for it. This is the ideology of colonialism again, the one that presupposes the presence of first-class people and everyone else, who should work and give everything they have in favor of these first-class people, as it were. Do you understand? That's why they're not going to fight it. For them, these are such, maybe not very convenient, but quite familiar manifestations of their traditional philosophical views. Therefore, they follow the path of silencing these pages, unpleasant, creepy, terrible pages of the past. Therefore, they are trying to rewrite history in order to retouch all these historical realities. The unleashed revisionist war is dictated by the ideological attitudes of Brussels, as we have repeatedly said. They are trying to distort the image of our country, to present it as an aggressor state, taking into account the factor of our country as the successor of the USSR, and at the same time, they erase any mention of the feat of the Red Army in the fight against Nazism and fascism, which, I mean, the Red Army made a decisive, greatest contribution to the liberation of concentration camps, the cessation of mass extermination of people in many countries of Western Europe. The identification of Stalinism and Nazism is presented as an image, as they formulate it. They invented it all, an element of the alleged unity of the European Union. Just some monstrous logic. Historical concepts are being substituted. Here's Nazism now. Do you see how interesting it is? Read their NATO and EU documents inside these states. Now they are not talking directly about Nazism. They are now talking about authoritarianism. How's that? It was. These are not historians, but characterized the times of the Third Reich as Nazism. It was they themselves, the Third Reich, so to speak, and all the countries that got together in this bunch of misanthropists, invented all these names. Fascists arose, fascism arose in Italy. Nazism was not the ideology of the Third Reich, so to speak, glorified state. Why then now pretend that this did not happen, and come up with some kind of authoritarianism? Authoritarianism is completely different. But we see that in some European countries, they are still not ready to put up with the forcible zeroing of historical memory. But yes, we see a cynical attitude in this very Yatsev bureaucracy towards Latvia. Even these ardent manifestations of neo-Nazism in the form of torchlight processions, these Waffen-SS processions, symbols and so on, they do not see in order not to raise the issue, do nothing and not draw attention to it. They are obliged to notice numerous facts: mockery of the memory of the victims of fascism, the revival of neo-Nazi sentiments. But in fact, let's say as it is, they only provoke the Baltic countries, I mean their regimes, and in particular the Latvian authorities, to continue this vicious practice of glorifying SS criminals. So let's move on. Is the evening news with us, Serbia? I don't speak Russian very well, so I'm going to ask a question in English. Opposition students are now holding protests in Belgrade. They are already saying that they will act there. And there is information that the demonstrators are planning to draw attention and hold the current government accountable and seize the television building. How do you think this will affect stability in the entire region, the Balkan region? We are following what is happening in Serbia, because it is not just about the country of our continent. This is a friendly country, and it is a very close people to us, with whom we have passed any of the tests. We certainly call for restraint again. Political forces. We call for restraint of all those involved in the events that have seized the country, and it is very important to understand how high the price of rash steps can be, which are dictated by emotions that can be provoked. We expect the situation to normalize as soon as possible through a mutually respectful dialogue. Do you have any more questions? Do you have another question?
I don't understand.
You.
Did you get the interpretation?
Yes, thank you.
Do you have anything to add? Do you have additional questions or
Do you have any additional questions? Can I continue? Yes, please continue. Is the Tavria Broadcasting Company with us? Tavria, in my opinion, yes.
Hello, yes, Tavria.
Yes, hello.
Maria Vladimirovna, we know that today you have already raised the issue of foreign mercenaries who were convicted, who were captured. We have a question about their search and search. We know that a large number of foreign mercenaries are participating on the side of the nationalists, in the ranks of the armed forces of Ukraine. In the Kherson region, we know for sure about the presence of French, Polish mercenaries. In other regions, mercenaries from Latin America are often mentioned. We have a question: is there an international mechanism to bring mercenaries to justice? And the limit works with countries from which mercenaries come to the territory of new regions of Russia, to search for and bring them to justice.
First of all, I want to draw your attention to the words that were uttered yesterday by the President of Russia regarding foreign mercenaries and how we qualify them in our country. A very important thesis, a very important statement that has been made. The second point, we initially said that nothing good was waiting for foreign mercenaries in the Ukrainian conflict, and warned them as is what their fate would be. Their fate is obvious. They become hostages of the ambitions of their own regimes. They become hostages of the deception of the Kiev regime and lured them in different ways and sent them there in different ways. Someone was sent under the guise of mercenaries, but they were actually representatives of the special services of the respective countries. Someone was bought with stories about the alleged threat to democracy in Ukraine. That is, who was sent there and lured there. And we honestly talked about why they are being lured there or why they are being sent there, and most importantly, what will happen to them next. And they warned that they should not expect any leniency to their criminal acts due to the fact that they have foreign passports. We have repeatedly drawn attention to the actions of the relevant countries, which allowed Ukrainian embassies to completely cross out the provisions of the Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Consular Relations and engage in recruitment. Yes, they are not even so much mercenaries as some kind of fighters with a one-way ticket, and that's what we did. Of course, we mostly heard from the relevant countries, which we qualify as unfriendly, and sometimes we didn't even hear anything in response. And sometimes we heard some smirks. They waved them off, pretended that they either didn't understand what we were talking about, or that somehow it was normalizing there. And someone behind this was hiding behind everything, just the direction of representatives of their own special services on the territory of Ukraine and so on. The situation has changed. How they ran after us when it turned out that everything we warned about was absolutely true, and it would be so. And these same mercenaries, or those who called themselves a mercenary, but represented the relevant special services of these very states, did not answer the phone calls of their loved ones. And then, when it was obvious that they would not answer these calls anymore, or when they found themselves in the dock, in pre-trial detention centers, when absolutely fairly formulated criminal cases were initiated against them. Oh, how the position of those who in the 22nd year, in different NATO countries, or NATO-centric countries, did not want to listen to us has changed. And didn't they run around? How they fidgeted, how they started knocking, calling, writing, sending notes, or even some messengers, with a request about how it would be possible to return this or that little man, how it would be possible to contribute. They were the same all before. What did they not hear? Did not want to listen to what they were told, and I will explain to you why it was so. Because they were absolutely sure of the upcoming image blitzkrieg. There was absolute confidence. But they miscalculated. Therefore, we return to point 1. Listen to what the President of the Russian Federation said yesterday about mercenaries. It would be very good. I think we will do it so that this separate fragment is translated into as many languages as possible and becomes accessible to everyone who is following this situation from abroad. And the last thing I would like to say, we talk about this regularly, is that our law enforcement agencies are carrying out appropriate work, according to, so to speak, tickets bought by mercenaries. For some, this is a one-way ticket. For others, fate has mercy, and they become the objects of criminal investigations, which, apparently, also, so to speak, sobers them in many ways. You have also seen the interviews of these mercenaries. You have seen their tears, so to speak, which few people believe, because they warned, and because they have the blood of innocent people and civilians on their hands, including. To be honest, you can believe their sincere remorse when they are really sincere. Yes, I believe it when they really say that they realized everything, realized that they were victims of such deceptions. Yes, then you can really believe them. But I want to say again that we have repeatedly commented on this topic and gave all explanations to everyone and carried out the appropriate work. And of course, every day for a long time, he has been working in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, an ambassador at large, to his Miroshnik, who systematizes all incoming information about the crimes of the Kiev regime, reports it in the form of reports that are distributed by our representative offices at international organizations, our embassies publicly. These reports are addressed by the Minister of Foreign Affairs to their colleagues, representatives of international organizations. They are published to the general public, and including the relevant sections, there are devoted to mercenaries.
Thank you very much, Marina.
Thank you. Rudiv TV channel is with us.
Yes, good afternoon, Maria Vladimirovna, the Duddy Commission for More. And I will have two questions concerning, as you can guess, the Kurdish issue. The first in Turkey. Since the 1st of March, the Kurdistan Workers' Party has announced a ceasefire, which has been waging an armed struggle in Turkey for 40 years. This happened against the background of a call by the imprisoned leader of the Kurdistan Workers' Party, Abdulan, to the members of the organization, lay down their arms and stop armed resistance with Turkey. He also pointed out that the PKK itself should be dissolved. How does Moscow assess this step, and what possible effects of this step, in your opinion, may be in the region and in Turkey itself?
We proceed from the fact that any steps and efforts aimed at reducing violence in the country and the region as a whole, which are aimed at creating an atmosphere of trust in order to solve existing problems by peaceful means, can only be welcomed. And we hope that these events will serve to achieve peace, strengthen stability and security.
Thank you. The second question concerns Syria, and the same thing, the Kurdish issue. The interim Syrian government, headed by and the Kurds, the Kurdish forces, the democratic forces of Syria signed an agreement on March 10th. That recognizes the rights of the Kurds, constitutional rights in the Syrian state, and ensures the integration of key structures of the Kurdish autonomy into state institutions, and establishes a framework for joint cooperation in the field of security. And do you think the new agreement will ensure the integrity of Syria and bring long-term stability to the country, given the recent tragic events in western Syria?
Well, no, guided by the principle that we have repeatedly talked about, namely respect for the territorial integrity and sovereignty of the unity of Syria, Russia really welcomes the agreement reached on the return of the Trans-Euphrates to the bosom of the Syrian state, taking into account the legitimate rights and interests of all ethnic and religious groups living in this region. And in general, we proceed from the fact that the fate of their country should be determined by the Syrians themselves, within the framework of a broad public dialogue without outside interference. And we regard the conclusion of a corresponding agreement between the Syrian authorities and the leadership of the Syrian Democratic Forces as an important step towards restoring the unity of Syria, strengthening its security and stability. We understand that ensuring the practical implementation of the agreements reached will certainly involve diverse problems, difficulties, and challenges. To overcome them, it is necessary to maintain a constructive attitude and, of course, a willingness to compromise. And we hope that the parties will succeed.
Thank you.
Thank you. Is Greater Asia with us? Good afternoon, Maria Vladimirovna. Hello, Ina Fernandi, TV channel Greater Asia. We have one question. Last week, the chargé d'affaires of the Chinese embassy in Moscow noted that Russia and China are striving to further optimize the visa regime. Maria Vladimirovna, please tell us how effectively the work in this area is proceeding according to the Russian Foreign Ministry. What prevents the creation of more favorable conditions for mutual trips of citizens of the two countries? And can Russian tourists expect to travel to China without visas in the foreseeable future? Thank you. Let's start with the second part of your question. The fact is that today Russian tourists and, by the way, Chinese tourists already have the opportunity to travel between our countries, or to our countries, without visas as part of tourist groups on the basis of the relevant intergovernmental agreement of February 29th of the 2000th year. And last year, over 1 million people, including 567,000 Chinese tourists and 480, took advantage of such a tool, such an opportunity. And 468,000 Russian tourists. That is, well, in general, we can say somewhere almost 50 to 50%, well, maybe with a big advantage, probably in the direction of Chinese tourists, but the numbers speak for themselves, I think. And now to the first part of your question. Currently, work is underway through professional agencies to make changes to this agreement in order to create even more favorable conditions for mutual travel. These issues, namely bilateral cooperation or bilateral cooperation to improve tourist flows, humanitarian exchanges. This topic is in the focus of attention at the site under the Commission for Cooperation in the Field of Tourism of the Russian-Chinese Commission for Humanitarian Cooperation, and this topic is always on the agenda of the country's leadership. Because one of the tasks is not only the realization of people's desire to see our countries, to travel, but one of the additional tasks is to make people recognize each other, recognize the countries that are neighbors, and with the second longest border for our country. This is the border with China, with such a huge potential for business opportunities, cooperation, joint interaction. A dialogue on the progressive liberalization of the mutual travel regime is maintained on an ongoing basis with Chinese partners. The agreement on facilitating the travel of citizens of the 2013 year is also being successfully implemented between our countries. Let me remind you that this agreement provides for simplification of the visa processing procedure, an agreement on mutual cancellation of visa requirements with the Special Administrative Region of the People's Republic of China Hong Kong. This is the 2009 year, and Macau, the 2012. China is also included in the list of countries whose citizens are issued a multiple-entry tourist visa for up to 6 months, on the basis of confirmation of booking a place in a hotel or other accommodation facility, information about which is contained in the Unified Register of Classification Hotels or Beaches, Ski Slopes. And one more important point, citizens of the People's Republic of China can use a single electronic visa, the validity period of which is 60 days, from the date of its registration. What does it give? What opportunities does it open up? This is the right for a foreign citizen to stay on the territory of our country for 16 days with a guest or business visit, as a tourist, as well as to participate in scientific, cultural, socio-political, economic, sports events. In the near future, changes will be made to the legislation in terms of increasing the validity period of an electronic visa from 60 to 120 days, as well as the permitted period of stay of a foreign citizen in our country, in Russia on an electronic visa, from 16 to 30 days. This is the kind of work being done. But if we go back directly to China, we are cooperating with our Chinese partners in this area based on practice, the results of the implementation of existing agreements. In other words, this work is not being completed. It is being painstakingly carried out on a literally daily basis. Thank you very much for the detailed and understandable answer. Thank you. Is the author and with us?
Hello, Maria Vladimirovna. Ruslan Pankatov, author, and just the other day, on the 10th of March, our editorial office was subjected to a very powerful cyberattack. Our its specialists recorded and were surprised, in any case, not only by the high professionalism, but also by the scale of this attack. In other words, several countries took part there: the USA, Great Britain, Belgium, Turkey, Ukraine, Poland. It's amazing that there were no Baltic states there yet. But
They are, apparently,
yes,
getting ready to the marches. I mean the official authorities. They have now, so to speak, a torchlight procession is planned here.
yes, they had no time.
There's no time.
Well, what I mean is that we associate this, of course, with the revealing publication of the Russian financial group such a Limitin. Its founders are citizens of the NATO countries Latvia, Spain, and the Kingdom of Monaco. There have been threats, but we associate them with some kind of initiative, but that's probably not the question. This is what the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation, together with law enforcement agencies, are undertaking or will undertake in order to protect our Russian media from such cyber attacks. And it may be possible to raise this issue of protection from cyber threats at such venues as the UN and BRICS in general.
I get it. You know this question. It has two planes of measurement. The first one, these are Russian competent authorities and Russian law enforcement agencies. Law enforcement agencies investigate cyber crimes. The competent authorities do everything to prevent the existence of opportunities, or to prevent the implementation of these opportunities for cybercrime. This is the first block. This is for the competent authorities, law enforcement agencies, and both of them are, and criminals were found, and criminal chains were covered, and all this was given to the court. And there are whole internal concepts of information security, and complexes of measures and so on. In other words, this is the first block. The second block is what you are talking about. Putting this topic on international platforms, the Russian Foreign Ministry is responsible for international cooperation in the field of information security. This work is being carried out on a systematic basis to promote not only our approaches, but also the practical implementation of these approaches in the documents of international organizations. One of the tasks is to prevent impunity for the actions of intruders, these are both criminals, in an individual capacity, and states in the digital environment, through the development of uniform rules of the game for the whole world. First of all, we are talking about the development of universal legally binding agreements that would ensure effective and transparent regulation of the global information space. The first step in this direction was the adoption of the Convention Against Cybercrime by the UN General Assembly, which was agreed upon at the initiative of Russia. After the document enters into force, it will allow establishing real interaction between the law enforcement agencies of the participating states in the fight against cybercriminal, including with respect to, as you correctly said, Russian journalists. At the same time, we are seeking the adoption of similar treaties on other aspects of international information security, including in the field of preventing the settlement of interstate conflicts. Russia, with the support of states and like-minded people, is defending such installations in various multilateral formats. In particular, and first of all, these are specialized sites of the United Nations. This is an open-ended working group on international information security. This is a special committee for the development of a comprehensive convention on countering information crime, including with regard to Russia's initiation of consideration of the identified problems on relevant international platforms, including ION and, in particular, BRICS. What the Foreign Ministry does on a systematic basis in different formats based on the relevant mandate. Just an example of the result of such initiatives is the recently approved Convention on Combating Cybercrime. As for the problem of cyber attacks in general, we face it simply on a daily basis. Periodically, by the way, we also give statistics when either the attacks themselves are of some unprecedented nature and our resources do not work, or we simply inform on a systematic basis about what those who allegedly do not have their own hackers are doing, and everyone is looking for strangers, you know. Our government agencies, I mean public authorities, and not only state, regional, and municipal authorities, know firsthand what cyber attacks are. Our companies, our businesses, mobile operators, our banking institutions, websites, portals, services provided in an online format are endlessly subjected to one or another of the most sophisticated attacks. Therefore, we are talking about the continuation of externally coordinated cyber aggression against our country and its citizens. The goal is clear too. What? Diverse destabilization of the situation in the country, damage to our economy, the management system, provoking various emergency incidents, and even man-made disasters. And in this sense, it would be wrong to apply a certain, probably, special set of measures only in relation to one particular area. It is necessary to approach the protection of cyberspace as a whole, comprehensively and systematically.
Thank you very much, in great detail.
Thank you. Is the voice of the fatherland with us?
Yes, hello Maria Vladimirovna. We have two questions today, and here is the first of them. Can we say now that the United States of America has capitulated to the Russian Federation? And this is the question of what they were afraid of and whether we will put the squeeze on. They influenced Europe and Ukraine in the way we need it to stop the aggression.
Please, but we are not at a circle of fiction lovers, not at a symposium, so to speak, of producers of thrillers, or filming detective series. We are with you at an event called a briefing by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the official representative of the Russian Foreign Ministry. I comment on facts, trends, I comment on events, answer questions on the agenda. You see, and the way you want to formulate your worldview or your philosophy by artistic means is your right, so to speak. You can do whatever you want. I do what is prescribed to me within my authority. If you have specific questions, they may be not only about a specific event, they may also be of some general nature, but related to my competence. I will always answer. Artistic images are also beautiful, but, probably, again, when evaluating some specific things, I have repeatedly told you about this. I'll repeat it again, please. By the way, many people think that you are asking provocative questions not to me, but in general. That's what many people think. I would like not to hold this point of view, but then don't give me a reason. Well, why do all this? Absolutely. We have practical work to do. We are having a dialogue now. At least it is being initiated with the American side. What kind of global assessments, especially of such quality, should we talk about for what? What is the goal? What is your goal? To what? I don't really understand. If it's about a work of art, but again, it's not for me then. I want to tell you that many people ask questions about why you formulate it all in this way. For example, it is also becoming not very clear to me. I am always open to all questions. If you have any topic on my particular work, I am always, please, ready to answer. But I would ask you not to do such things after all.
And how are the negotiations with the United States going at the moment?
Here I look. Yuri Viktorovich Ushakov gave a comment on this matter regarding the existing contacts. These are the contacts that took place. You can see his comments. Other contacts that we are really planning have not yet taken place to date. They may still be there today, but we haven't participated in them yet. When this fact happens, we will inform you. Thank you very much. And, of course, we maintain contacts at the diplomatic level through our embassies. They are becoming more active than they were under the previous administration. There are a lot of questions. We are awaiting the start of our ambassador's work in Washington. But at the same time, the embassy already, so to speak, sees a certain tendency to activate feedback through the State Department. For our part, as you know, we have never proactively blocked such contacts. We, the only thing, answered in a mirror if we saw such an attitude towards us. At the same time, we are also in contact with the American embassy in Moscow, because there are already planned issues for not just discussion, but for elaboration. Therefore, yes, of course, contacts have intensified at the level of our embassies and diplomats. In other words, I would say so. They have stopped being blocked and have a tendency to activate.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. If there are any more questions, I am ready to answer them. If not, if someone could not connect, then we will respond to you address-wise. Thank you very much. Until new meetings and prosperity.